All right.
Howdy, Carson.
Hey, how you doing?
Been a tough couple of weeks, but I've been good.
Oof. Gotcha.
I've
Well, I'm glad you've
I've
been
been
good.
working the past 2 weeks, and I've had 2 days off, but I have a night off tonight, so that's good.
Gotcha. Well, I'm glad you got the night off. But yeah. Okay, so we're waiting on two people. Phil Boardman is about to show up, and then it looks
All
like
right.
Travis Talks might show up as well. Did you watch the debate I put together with Travis Talks and Harley Dalton? That's the same guy that you
I
had debated a while
I
back.
may have listened to it when I was at work, but I've been kind of on autopilot the past few days, so I'm not totally sure.
Gotcha. Yeah, so there's going to be three different things I want to talk about today, and it's going to work out well that it's going to be the two of us and then those two. Um,
Okay.
so, two things I want to talk about involving the society project that hasn't been talked about yet will be voting ratios. Like, if we decide, like, if there has to be a percentage, like at least two-thirds of the lawmakers have to vote in a law before a law becomes a law, or if we want to do like
Okay.
majority rule. And so that'll be one of the talks. One will be the age of adulthood.
Okay.
Um, and then the third topic, which will be the only one from that list of 15 that we did, is going to be trans people in prisons. And the reason this one will be interesting is Travis is undecided on it, and then Phil is kind of undecided, kind of leaning towards that there should be something against born males in female prisons. And then
Okay.
I don't know if you've heard me talk about the topic, but I'm kind of on the fence, but I
We've talked
lean.
about it together a
Okay.
couple of times.
Okay, I was
Yeah.
thinking so. And so this will be kind of an interesting conversation to see if you can kind of sway those two
And
one way or the other.
anybody who's seen us talk about it knows exactly how like very open I am to letting them be in women's prisons.
Yeah. So yeah, it'll be interesting to break it down. I'm gonna glance really quick. Yeah, it seems like on the topic it was voted as of right now. There's 13 yeses, 11 nos, and three undecided. And so it's a close call. So with a handful of
That's a
conversations on the
pretty
topic,
even split there. Yeah.
yeah. So with a handful of
Honestly, I was
conversations
expecting a
on the
lot
topic,
more no's.
um, well, it's 11 no's for not outlawing it, as in yours was a no.
Oh, no,
Yeah,
that makes more sense. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But either way,
I
it's
was
a, it's
expecting a
a
lot more yeses then.
gotcha. Yeah, it's a pretty close call. Let's see. We got Travis in here. Travis, it looks like you're muted. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, awesome. Um, all right. So, Phil's going to join us in a little bit, but let's just get
Oh
started.
no.
So, I'm going to have, let's see. Okay, the first thing we're going to talk about is voting ratios. So, like, assuming that this project might end up being like, say, 50 senators. So uh, we're planning the society, voting on these laws. Travis, do you have a thought? And we can even compare it to like the U.S. For a law to pass, is there a certain percentage of people that vote on a law that there should be a certain percentage before the law passes?
Yeah, well, my view would be that it should just be over 50% majority. If the majority
Okay.
votes in favor of it, it should pass.
Okay.
I'm
Aric,
of a similar mindset. Yeah.
okay, gotcha. So, the reason I feel like I lean more towards like a two-thirds situation is because I like when it's hard to change something. It's not just if the whims of the majority are leaning one way or another. That at any given point, people can have their like freedom stripped from them. I like the idea of like having to convince a higher percentage. What are Travis? What's your thoughts on why that wouldn't be best?
I'm just inclined towards like a more democratic system. I feel like if most people are in favor of something, if most like representatives are in favor of something, it should pass. Like I
Okay.
don't see why the minority should be able to prevent something that the majority supports from getting through.
Okay. So like if like in the US there was say one year there was 52 Republican senators and 48 Democratic senators, and then let's imagine 4 years later it's going to switch up or something. Would you say it's as simple as if the Republicans all decide together that they want a bunch of different things to go through because it's 52 that it should go through?
Um, well, if the Republicans decide that they want a bunch of things to go through, I mean, I think that probably is just the best system to have, because I think it allows people, like, if people vote for a certain political party, I think it's good for that party to be able to implement what it campaigned on. And if people don't like what that party's doing, they can just replace it. I don't like the gridlock we have in the current political system in the U.S., where you get elected, but then you can't get anything done.
Gotcha. Okay.
I forgot to bring a notepad with me.
Oh, gotcha. Well,
Um,
okay. Well, Eric, do you have any other thoughts on the topic before we switch to the next one?
so I I like the idea. Like I generally lean towards a majority vote, but my thing, I have a stipulation for that, and it's that if there is, say, like, I mean, I've lived in America my entire life, so this is probably sheltered by that, but if there is a two-party system, effectively, we could just end up seeing what we've seen for the past, I don't know, 8, 12 years, probably longer, honestly, where like one party will just obstinately vote along party lines and just refuse to let things go through, and that kind of becomes an issue. Um, so I think that, like, in order to fully flesh out an answer for which one of those I'd prefer, I would need some more clarifying questions. But as it stands, like, generally the majority seems to be the way to go.
Okay.
Um, I don't know how to balance it properly though. I'm no lawmaker, so.
Harsh, and
Yeah.
I would also say that I don't like the current U.S. political system. Ideally, I think we would reform it to make it more
First past the
democratic than it
post would
is.
probably be something to reform.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, that too. We need to get rid of that. Well, the problem with first past the post, one of the problems with that is it's a similar thing where with first past the post, you can get candidates elected when like the majority of voters voted against them.
Oh yeah.
Gotcha.
We see that a lot of the time. A lot of
Like
times, especially over the past 30 or so years.
there are like primary elections where you have candidates have won with like less than 20% of the vote before they've gotten the
Oh
nomination,
yeah.
just because there are so many people running. And it's like, so you have a situation where like 80% of people like voted against this candidate, but because they got the plurality, they get in. I would prefer something like ranked choice voting or some
Hmm.
alternative voting system.
Yeah.
Frank
Well,
choice would be a pretty good first step to me. Yeah.
and I think so with this project, since the senators are we're kind of already there, the deciding how to vote on things will just be about the laws themselves. But I think we will do something like that, where if we start off with a range of things, kind of like the abortion one, there was a range of options of conception, 12 weeks, 20 weeks, birth. And then once we get a gist of what everybody wants, I think it, if I remember correctly, with the abortion one, let's see, it was 9 people were at 12 weeks, 6 people at 20 weeks, and then 7 people at birth. So now that we have a feel for what people are kind of wanting, if we kind of narrow it down, there's a good chance that between the variety of people, it'll land somewhere on like 14 or 15 weeks. So we'll just have to
Was
have
there any, just out of curiosity, was there any like nevers in there? Because I feel like there'd be
For
at least one
conception, you
person
mean?
that I've spoken to. No, I mean like no abortion. I don't remember
Yeah.
specifically the question, but I feel like that was one of them. Was there nevers? Because I feel like there's one person that would have been a never in that one.
Yeah, there were three nevers.
Yeah, that might also be an interesting.
And I think Harley was probably one of the nevers because I remember talking to him.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Harley is comfortable with me saying it was him. I do want to make sure that everybody's comfortable with me sharing who voted what, but I think that's part of this project is being okay with everybody knowing what you're voting for. But yes, Harley was a never.
I remember talking to him and like the half-hour conversation we had after the camera went off and all the stuff he said. So like that's not shocking to me.
Gotcha.
I
Speaking
can
of Harley,
volunteer it,
Harley's
but I was a
Harley's here right now.
how you doing, Harley? But with full transparency, I was a at conception like vote myself because I don't like the idea of the slippery slope that comes into place when they start putting restrictions down.
Gotcha. Well, let's hold off on.
Oh, they left.
Oh, Harley's gone. Let's.
British internet.
All right. Well, I was gonna ask Harley to. Oh, there's Jeremy. Okay. Hello, Jeremy.
Howdy.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, let me listen to you guys for a sec because I got the email 1 minute ago and just logged onto the group.
Yeah.
So
Well, here I'll tell you. I'll catch you up real quick.
I don't know the context.
I'll catch you up real quick. So we're talking about
dude.
this society project, and one thing I want to get figured out before we go over any more laws. One thing I want to figure out is if we want to vote on how the voting
you
ratio
guys
should play
can't-
out. Well, hold on, Eric.
You can't hear this, can you? When I wave my hat at myself,
No, you're fine.
it's like 100 degrees outside right now.
You're fine. But yeah, so just deciding if we want to. So Travis and Eric both say majority rule. So if we have 50 of us and it's 24 to 26, 26 makes the law go through. And then we just talked a little bit about it. I'm kind of concerned about that. I don't like the idea. If we were to compare it to the U.S., I don't like the idea that if 1 year there's 52 Democrats and 48 Republicans, and then the Second Amendment gets removed, and then 4 years later it's the other way around, and then now that the Republicans are in, it's like, I don't know, everybody must be Christians, or I don't know, but I don't like the idea that if a majority by one votes a certain way, that's the new law of the land. I don't know if my argument's convinced either of these two. So let's go with Phil. Phil, do you agree with these guys on majority rule, or do you lean towards like a 2/3, 3/4?
There is, I think if you don't want to have a constitution, one thing that's kind of interesting is each time you pass a law, you could include in the law maybe, well, you wouldn't want to always be able to do this because then you're screwing over the next Congress, and then it's less democratic for the next group of people. Because you've said, okay, you have to have this majority. There's some times where it kind of has to be the case, though. Like, let me say this, for example. If you look at the European Union and states entering into the European Union and leaving, to me, it makes sense that if you want to leave after you've entered in, maybe you need like 60%, not 51%. Something where it's not like you're oscillating back and forth, causing chaos for your own economy because you're having a political tug of war.
Does that mean so to make a law, it would be majority, but to change a law, it would be like 60% or 2/3?
I would say that we could work out the details, but that's just my initial analysis of what the problem would be. So we could have in the Constitution something that says, well, okay, if you want to set, for example, if you want to say that you need more than 50% of the vote in the future to change the law, then you can set that. But let's say on our Constitution, you have to beat whatever that is by 10%. So if you want to say, okay, we're making this a law and you need 60% of the body politic, right, of the political body, senators, representatives, whatever it is, to then overturn the law, then in order to pass that, you need 10% more of whatever threshold you're demanding. So let's say 70% of your senators have to say, yes, this is the final law, and in order to overturn it, 60%.
Gotcha. Okay. Jeremy, what are your thoughts? Oh, you're muted, Jeremy.
Okay.
Oh, real quick before you go, Jeremy, Harley, we're just talking about for us senators for the Society Project, if what percentage of the vote needs to happen to change a law. So Eric, who you know up here, and Travis, who you know, both are going for majority rule. So if we have if we had 100 of us, if 51 vote one way, that's the new law. Phil is leaning towards that it has to be 60%. Agreeing before the law is changed, and then Jeremy's about to share his thoughts.
So
May I make a quick correction?
Yeah, sorry.
That was only an example. I'm not saying that has to be the case.
Okay.
I'm a 50%, 51% enjoyer as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to say my short answer is that I agree with the concept that Phil put out, but the thing I got to say that's going to underlie everything that I say about specific political issues, so it should be the first thing I say, is that I think that that in any just reasonably healthy society, it's going to be the case that the vast majority of organization is going to have to do with social structure or kind of organic social structures, family structures, the individual moral values of the people that make it up, and things that are not stemming from the law. So I think of the law, and especially the criminal law, as sort of like the tools that a surgeon or a hospital has available to occasionally intervene when there's an unusual problem, to perform a surgery or to do something that brings the broken human back to a normal, healthy state. But the healthy state itself is coming from the civil society. It's coming from the social norms and the the interactions between the individuals. So I to think of the law as something like Dr. Frankenstein trying to build the healthy person from scratch or whatnot. It seems like a very wrong way, dangerous way to think about law. So,
Let me cut you off real quick. Just Jeremy,
okay,
because I know that's your stance, and I think Phil has a very similar stance to you as far as the majority of the citizens in an area have a huge effect on how something should go. I would say for now, while it's just us creating laws based on our own personal stances, we should imagine that us lawmakers are also the only citizens. So we're each throwing out an idea for what we want to take place in this area, knowing ourselves. And if you want to feel like you are accepting the variety of stances you hear as well.
Yeah, I'll just very briefly in one sentence. I don't think that you can come up with a good individual view on what the law should be without first understanding a description of the cultural and moral norms of the people that you're trying to impose law upon.
Okay.
This is the second sentence, but it's not going to be one size fits all.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, so Harley, go ahead and share your thoughts. So let's say there were let's make it easy math. Let's say there were 20 of us senators, and we are trying to vote on something like if we were going to make it illegal to to circumcise babies. How many of the 20 senators do you think need to vote one way to make that the official law?
Well, hello everyone. You've had me until my pizza in my oven cooks, and then I'm done. So,
Okay.
not that you're not as important to me as that, but So, but I would say I lean more towards a system where previous laws enacted can't simply be repealed at the first opportunity, and so I lean more towards this kind of 60% following the initial vote. Like this, if there's an initial vote, let's say we're setting up this society, like you said, then it's majority rule, or it's first past the post, or whatever else it might be. But then once the laws have been put in place, then I think in the same way as the American Constitution requires a high burden to change constitutional amendments, that there should be not as strong, but certainly more weight, I think, put on changing that which was done before, which would require a bit more of a bit more consensus to do things, rather than it being to the whim of each election and to the whim of whatever particular movement was in vogue at a particular time. So,
okay. Yeah, I like that. All right. I think what I'll end up doing is similar to how I sent everybody the initial 15 things they voted on. When I send out a new section of things to vote on, the top one will be deciding, do we want majority rule or do we want 60%? And then we'll just see. We'll basically vote on seeing how our votes affect things. Phil, what's up?
Yeah, I just didn't want to, interrupt. Could we also have an option for my sort of hybrid system where I don't know if we go for 5% or 10%, but it's if the party passing the bill at the time wants to impose as high a threshold as they are allowed to, then it would depend on how many votes they had at the time. So if we have 60% of the votes to pass the law in the first place, that if there's a 10% difference, then that still puts the vote to overturn it at 50%. But if we have 65, that puts it at 55. If we have 75, that puts the vote to overturn at 65. You know what I'm saying? So
I'm not sure if I quite follow that. I'm really good with math, but for some reason, I'm not sure if I quite follow what you're saying. Do you? Okay.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask if Jeremy or Harley or anybody else understood that, and maybe I just wasn't catching it right.
I understand it. I've never heard anybody express that before.
Pretty well.
I'm terrible at math.
Like
were you trying to say that?
I'll just say it maybe I'll say it in another way. Okay, so let's imagine.
Let's do the 20. Well, Phil, real quick. Let's imagine there's 20 of us. There's actually 27 now. But let's say there's 20 of us. We're voting on circumcision. Give me an example of how that would play out, and then what would need to happen for the follow-up.
Okay, so for example, let's say we are all 20 of us, or let's say the law that's on the docket on the table is, let's say if we want to ban all video games, okay, because we just think they're bad and they cause violence or something. So we go to ban video games, and 11 of the 20 of us want to ban the video games. So we pass the law, and next time it comes around, let's say it flips. 11 of the 20 want to unban video games, then it passes. But under the Constitution, which is what we're calling this, I think, let's say as long as you have more than 60% of the vote, you can start imposing a restriction like you're talking about, a super majority. But you would only be able to say, okay, you'd have to, whatever majority the 20 is throwing me off. Sorry, and my baby is getting fussy. Hold 1 second, I'll be right back.
Gotcha.
I'll explain what I think he meant. I think I understood him pretty well. It's just that there would be different levels of passing some law, where a law that was passed by a larger supermajority would be enforced to a higher degree of supermajority needed to overturn it in the future.
Gotcha.
So if you have a law that barely passes slightly over 50%, it could be overturned by slightly over 50%, right?
Yeah. Yes. Can I jump back in? Because the whole
Of course.
20 thing is throwing me way up. If you have, let's say we're settling on 10%. Okay. That means if you have 90% agreement, we all pass the law, then you need 80% to overturn it years later. If you have 85% agreement, then you need 75% agreement to overturn it years later.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
I think as far as starting out and documenting things, it might be a little trickier. So if you guys, so I'm okay with having that be one of the options we put in, but for the sake of making it less complicated, I might prefer to have the options be just what percentage make or break a law. And then at any point, our votes can change anything. If anybody read the work in progress website I put up, I don't have any veto power. There's no voters that affect anything different than we all are just equally in power of our votes affecting things. And so at any point, we can propose something and then vote on it. And so I think initially just to make it go through what is law or not law, I think I'll ask people if they would prefer majority rule or 60%, and then if you draft up an idea for what you're describing, and then we propose that as part of the Constitution, then that could just be voted on and then go through if it goes through. Because I like the sound of it. I'm trying to imagine writing it out and the making the notes on how the next time it's affected. But yeah, let me ponder it, and I'll talk to you with you further on it as well. Okay, so let's.
Could I make a intervention?
Yeah, for sure.
I just figured would they so in this sort of society setup that you've got in, would there be kind of factions in the same way as you have like parties?
Nope. I don't think so. I think we would just all be individuals, because since we're not trying to get a group of citizens to align with either of us, or we're not like aligning with each other. I'm sure we could look at each other's stances and we could see how we would fit into parties that are in the UK or in the US or whatever. But at this point, I don't think we need that. I do like the idea of citizen involvement. I've had a handful of people ask me if, like, when they're watching it, like somebody wanted to know if they're allowed to propose laws for this, even though they're not one of the lawmakers. And I think it'd be cool and interesting to see what ideas people that are just watching us bring to the table. But I don't imagine a need for parties, which is kind of cool, because I think people are so used to when they have discussions, like I'm hoping I can put together where I pick two people that disagree on topics, or even a panel, and we kind of debate it. I like the idea that, like, none of us are left or right or whatever. We're just humans with opinions, and I think that'll be kind of cool. Okay.
I have to deal with the party fly.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we have a good idea for how to approach figuring out the vote thing. So the other main thing I wanted to talk about that I think will affect almost all these laws is deciding in our society what is the age of adulthood. So Travis hasn't talked in a while. So Travis, what would you say that you think, and when I say age of adulthood, we can keep in mind that we might have different ages for things, similar to 18-year-old adults can't drink alcohol till they're 21. And there's things like where non-adults in the US, when they're 16, they can drive. But let's say what we want to call an age of adult means when a parent can kick their child out of their house without that child going to foster care, and a kid can leave their parents' house without the government getting involved. The kid can just say, I'm moving out. What are we calling that age of adulthood? And it's fine to keep it what we're already used to. Travis, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't really have a view on that, so I'd probably just keep it at 18.
Okay. Harley, you're up next.
Yeah, I'd probably, surprised to hear me say this, agree with Travis. But I could probably be convinced to raise it, actually. I think,
Okay.
yeah, I think for certain things, I'm not entirely convinced, particularly men are mature enough at 18 for certain of the rights, particularly the ones related to alcohol and guns. So,
Okay.
I'd be convinced upwards, potentially.
Okay, Aric, what do you got?
I would say that I would want to set it around 21 or 22 because brain development doesn't really stop, at least not frontal lobe development, until you're about 25. That's at least the current consensus.
Okay.
So, we in America, somewhat exclusively, we kick our kids out at 18 and expect them to just go into the world and be okay. And that is too young. That is far too young.
Gotcha. Okay, so 21, 22 for you, 18. Jeremy, what are your thoughts?
Harley, you really stole my thunder there. I was going to say that based upon the science, as far as I'm aware of it, should probably be about 2 or 3 years older for males than for females.
I mean, that's an option. We're the lawmakers. We can do that. I don't think I agree that we should have it different depending on gender, but yeah, we can.
But yeah, so probably something like that, something like 20 for females and 22 for males.
40,
sounds about
40,
right.
I reckon is about right.
Also, having a this is like what Aric said. Having a gradual system of increasing legal independence and legal responsibilities that matches the facts of reality, that matches the actual psychological development. Yeah, it sounds more reasonable to me than just having this single cutoff point where you completely change somebody's status over the course of one birthday. Should we have to choose a single age of majority then?
We don't have to. We can choose whatever we want.
I'm going to be bold, and I'm going to take the sexist position that the psychology overwhelmingly suggests that natal females mature significantly faster than natal males. Like
Gotcha.
the error bars
They mature faster to a certain point, but there is a cutoff.
Phil, are you still there? I see weird lights happening.
Yeah, I just decided to put the phone in my pocket so I could change my son's diaper.
Oh, gotcha.
But
I thought he was being kidnapped or something.
yeah,
Phil, for anybody that doesn't know, Phil is new to
The fact that you
fatherhood.
guys understood what he said, which is
Okay,
the
Phil.
fact that anybody understood that means that my internet is like dog shit right now. Hold on.
Phil, what's your thought on age of adulthood?
so I'm flexible on this. I'll kind of, you know how I am. I'm almost frustrating to you. I just kind of go along with what the society wants. So, it seems to be popular to say 20, 21, 22. So I'll go along with any of those. I think that purely because of our language, we say teenager, which ends at 20. So that would be sort of my baseline. My baseline would be to say, 20, something like that.
Gotcha.
Oh, I seem to have lost the picture altogether.
Oh, yep, your picture's gone.
But,
Gotcha, 20. Okay.
But I just want to add, I would be up for the idea of people volunteer. They think they're ready for a certain level of maturity, so they take the test, whatever that test of maturity or intelligence or whatever it is would be.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
seems pretty reasonable to me that anybody who's capable of doing the work to graduate from high school early and then hold their own in university classes, live by themselves, live in a dormitory at a university and attend classes. If they're doing that at 16 years old, then they should probably have all the other rights that we assign to adults. I don't see any reason why somebody who's fully attending a university schedule at 16 shouldn't be able to have sex with whoever they want, smoke cigarettes and vote in governmental elections.
Interesting, yeah, and we could draft up an idea for what we think would constitute good reason for emancipation. So that could be interesting. I think, I'm kind of torn on the topic. I mean, looking at nature, it has some connection to puberty. I mean, most mammals in the wild, they have babies. They take care of their babies. When their babies hit puberty, they take off and struggle and try to figure their shit out. It's more complicated with humans because they take longer to figure stuff out. In some societies, I'm sure there are people that are raised without helicopter parents that basically seem more like adults when they're like 15 or 16. And then in other societies where people are super babied and pampered and whatnot, they just seem not ready to be adults until they're 20, 21, whatever. So I guess I lean somewhere near 18 probably, but I think what I'll do is everybody can pick their number out of our right now 27 people, and then we'll just do an average of all the numbers. Whatever that is the answer, and then it'll take either majority or 60% to change that if somebody wants to propose raising or lowering it. So that'll be the next thing, and then we can also vote on separate things, like if we want there to be things like, I think even though 18 is the legal age, if parents give permission, 16-year-olds can get tattoos, 16-year-olds can get married. So that can be separate things that we go over. Do we want different ages for alcohol, different ages for guns, or joining the military and stuff like that? But I like the idea of having a baseline for, if you're kicked out of your house by your parents, will the government take you into foster care? And if you want to leave your parents' house, at what year can they not stop you? And so that's kind of that seems like the best way to describe an adult in my mind, because everything else can vary. Gotcha. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that one before we hop to the next topic?
Age of consent should be a separate conversation, because like there are cases to be made that there should be more strengthened dividing lines on those. Like how he said, if somebody's holding up a university schedule at the age of 16, they should be able to have sex with anybody they want. There's matters of like power imbalances and coercion and things like that can happen, but that's a conversation for another time.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay, so I have a pretty good idea of how I'll set up the voting on those two. So the next topic I was going to bring up is kind of just going through and figuring out if we want to reword or adjust the phrasing of some of the laws that we're passing. And one law in particular that I think would be interesting to go over first out of those 15 was outlaw trans women in female prisons. We got out of 27 people, 13 said yes to outlaw it, 11 said no, and 3 said undecided. So that was wildly close call, and I think it could be interesting if we figure out, at least amongst the 6 of us here, why cases where it would be different or not different. So I personally. I personally voted yes to outlaw it, but I think it's complicated, and I think there's stipulations where it should be fine. And my go-to example is someone like Blair White. The look of Blair White, if she was to go murder somebody and go to prison, and because she was born male, she had to go to a male prison, this would be devastating. This should not happen. But at the same point, the idea of putting people that were born male with fully functioning penises into women's prisons. That seems devastating. So let's go ahead and talk it out and see if we can figure out if we should phrase what I said better, and or sorry, not what I said, but if we can phrase the law that's being proposed better, and maybe we need to faction it off into like 3 different types of laws or caveats for the laws. So let's see who has not talked in a little while. Let's go ahead and Harley, are you busy with food, or do you have a sec to be next to talk?
Well, I have a second to opine because I like to sound my own voice. I will say that I've got my pizzas ready now, so I don't know if anyone can see the beauty.
Nice.
It's,
2 of them.
There you go. Yes,
Nice.
one normal cheese and one pepperoni. Yeah, I think. So I was one of the no's, and I was one of the unqualified no's on that particular topic. I think that when you're discussing about, there's a balance to strike, as you say, the people like Blair White, who perhaps wouldn't aesthetically be appropriate in a men's prison, and perhaps you could have a qualification in the law that these people were to be put in separate prisons. However, I think that generally speaking, the types of people who get in prison and who are imprisoned for crime, particularly on the more masculine side, the male side, it's a function of aggression. And so I think you have this situation where you have one person who looks like Blair White going into a male prison, and that might cause, certain concerns, versus the fact that you have every trans woman, male, being of a physical, not an aesthetic, but a physical concern within a female space. And so I think the only qualification personally that I would accept would be a qualification where you create a third category, a third prison, an isolated wing, whatever else it might be. But I don't think, as a general rule, you should be allowing and making accommodations for men to go into female spaces, particularly female prisons, and particularly female prisons because these are people who have been convicted of a crime, and I think are due less consideration for their preferences, basically, because ultimately they'd prefer not to be in prison. So
yeah. I want to ask you one more question because I know you got to get onto your pizza. I agree with you about. I agree about the third category, but what makes me think that's interesting about this, because we wouldn't want Blair White to be in a men's prison because the harm that can come to Blair White, but then it makes me wonder if we should have different categories for people based on their size. Like if 95% of people in prison are super muscular, like gangstery type people, and then 5% are like just scrawny little string bean dudes that committed fraud from their company, and they're not like violent people. Do we need a section for them to not be basically have beaten within an inch of their life? Do you have a quick thought on that, Harley? And then after that, I'm going to hop over.
Yeah, I think the reality. I think the reality is that probably it's about how you run your prisons rather than about the types of bodies that you put into those prisons. And if you have prisons that are managed properly, taking account of both the needs of both the male and female population, then it doesn't matter whether you've got some scrawny guy who goes in there in the male population, because you have appropriate policing for that. I think if you have this kind of ranking system, then what you end up with is potentially, Serena Williams ending up in the male prison and some scrawny dude ending up in the female one. And so I don't think just a physical analysis like that really works. I think it has to be down to the biology, really.
Okay. And then Harley, if you feel like you got to hop off because of food, that's fine. Or you can eat pizza while talking, either way. But it's good talking to you, man.
No, I've got to pop off.
Okay. We'll get you on the next one. See you later. Okay, Travis, what are your thoughts on the I can't remember which way you voted, but what are your thoughts on the trans situation? Should there be a third wing of each of the male and female prisons for trans people so they aren't harmed? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I voted undecided, just because it's not an issue I've really thought about. One thing I did think of though is like if you have trans people who have already gotten bottom surgery, I feel it would be kind of strange to put them in the men's prison.
Okay. One argument that I've heard on that topic, which I agree with you in a sense, and something like testosterone levels and surgery should have some kind of an effect on it. But I've also heard of situations where, not that it's common with like sports stuff, but if there's like somebody that's like a like mixed martial arts type person who gets the surgery and the and has like the estrogen level or the testosterone levels down, they still like might have more muscle mass or like larger hands, this type of thing. So just the ability of strength. But in my mind, even though I have concerns, I think, Travis, I line up with what you just said, where I would want to see the outcome. If they've had the surgery, then let them choose. And then if after that, there's like some weird stats where the born males are physically harming the born females, then we would reevaluate. But I would guess there wouldn't be an issue. Jeremy, what are your thoughts?
I think the big part of a big part of the issue right now is that is the general principle on the political left that trans status is nothing more than a matter of personal self-identification, which leads to the potential for anybody to lie. Any criminal who just wants to go into a prison situation that's going to be easier for them can just arbitrarily declare that they realized that they were trans that very same day that they were convicted. And I mean, that's definitely part of the argument from the people who are not on the left, who oppose the idea of trans women in women's prisons is just that a lot of them are just going to actually be cis men who are lying to get an easier situation. So
the problem with that is that people have already tried to do that and it didn't pan out. Like there was a mass shooter whose lawyer decided that would be a good bid and it got shot down. There's like there's defining lines for that. How long have you been on the estrogen? How long have you done this? Have you committed to it? Have you gotten surgeries? Like part of the reason the estrogen is a consideration is because estrogen, once you take it long enough, decimates your muscle and bone mass. That's why when you look at like sports statistics over the past 50 or so years that we've been tracking them for trans people, there's no general like overachievement. They always achieve on par or under, and there's a couple of instances that get blown up, like Leah Thomas, that kind of go above that, but it's pretty rare. That's why they take that into consideration. So any old Tom, Dick, and Harry that shoots up a school or something and goes like, "Oh, well, actually, I'm a woman," they are not getting into the women's prison because they haven't been kneecapped by the estrogen yet.
Yeah, that's one of the key points. The other key point, everybody should be talking about is that the obscenity of the open tolerance of sexual assault and other forms of assault in prisons.
In women's prisons, it's a really big problem with male guards.
Male guards,
because of the power imbalance. There's like pregnant women in women's prisons who get raped by the guards a lot.
Oh yeah, but just in general, retributivism is a crazy and evil philosophical position, and the way that it pans out in
an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind.
In our prison culture, and even to the extent that it's a cliched joke among the general public that, and you go to prison, you're going to get raped. It's vile. We can't talk about policies like who goes to what prison without talking about this vile system in America right now that doesn't exist to this nearly same extent in many other countries.
Yeah. Luckily with this society we're creating, even though we can, so far it's decided that we can look at stats in the U.S. if outcomes are affecting how we vote. It's also a brand new society, so we can imagine nobody's in prison, and when they go to prison, that we don't have the situation where people are raped in those ways. But we can bring those in as we need new topics to go over. But yeah, well, Phil, let's get your thoughts on this topic.
Well, I remember I had a dilemma when I went to go write it because I felt like what I really wanted was a separate prison for cisgender females, transgender females, cisgender males, and transgender males, to be all in separate populations. But while was it Harley? While Harley was speaking, you touched on a point that I kind of think could replace that, perhaps, and perhaps I'm wrong, and that is put people in categories, which we kind of still do already in prisons, of like, there's maximum security, there's more prisons and areas for more dangerous people. You need to keep some of the weaker and less dangerous people away from the stronger and more dangerous people. I don't know exactly how to do that, but my initial instinct is to have 4 different categories rather than just male and female.
Okay.
Something else occurs to me, which is that maybe it seems like there's some science to back up the idea that all male or male dominated social interactions are close to the essence of the problem. Lack of female influence is part of the problem with creation of violent cultures. And so from a standpoint of rehabilitation, maybe our whole completely segregated prison system is flawed in that respect. And a big part of male violent criminals rehabilitation might be, regular controlled interaction with a diverse group of females.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that'd be interesting. Okay, let's. I'm curious to hear, Aric, if you have any argument for if there was an idea, because I mean, prisons are kind of sectioned off anyways. Kind of like, you have the worst offenders in this certain area. You have certain people that don't even come in contact with guards because they're so likely to be violent to guards. So if you do have sections where you have one building that is sectioned off into like, let's say 30% of it is born males, 30% of it's born females, and then 20% of it, well, anyways, percent doesn't matter, but you have sections where you have essentially the trans males in one section, trans females in another section, and then cis of each in the other categories. Do you have any reason to be against the existence of this, even if you don't think it's necessary?
Well, a big part of the problem that I would have with it is that when it is attempted, at least in the real world, it usually just devolves into we're going to put you all in solitary confinement because we don't want to build another wing on the prison. Solitary confinement does so much damage to a person. Like the Quakers outlawed it centuries ago. Like it's not something we should even lean towards.
Well, let's just say if it's our society.
My biggest problem is that there's just not enough trans people going to prison to justify a whole area, right? Like we know that generally they're not that big of a problem in Gen Pop. They can be, but it's important to keep people's social faculties working, to keep them in Gen Pop, keep them on the art. The kind of people that don't get to do that are the kind of people who already don't have good social faculties and they have to be worked back into it, or they're just in prison forever. I don't really particularly like that idea very much. It's social ostracization leads to a lot of problems. It can lead to antisocial issues. It can cause not nihilism. It can cause antisocial, as much as I don't like to repeat it, but like antisocial issues where people start to form like really hateful feelings towards other people. They start to shun people. It can cause depression. It can cause a lot of problems, really. There's not just, I haven't heard a very strong argument for putting them in their own wing, because that's what they used to do with gay inmates, and it turned out that that was actually really, really bad for them. I usually look to, I think it's Norway or Finland for their prison systems, where they have actual mattresses. They can get a TV. They can have a cat if they're not violent animals. They teach them how to drive. They give them
Yeah.
they give
Well,
them like social skills and things like that, so they can be reintegrated.
I think
into
it'd
society.
be amazing to get into ideas of what we think could be good for how our prisons work. But just as far as the trans thing goes, I think it'll be interesting to break
You've
that
talked to me
down.
enough to know that you have to cut me off, or I'm going to ramble.
That's
forever.
true. I do.
Aric, Aric,
Yeah.
also with respect to what Aric just said, also much lower sentences, even for
That's true as well.
even for serious violent crimes. The U.S. Sentencing standards are really long. They're too long, and then in addition to that, we have this culture that generally people commenting on our very long sentences think that they're not long enough. There's like this out of control retributivist culture in the U.S.
I want to put a pin in that. I want to put a pin in that real quick. Obviously, that's not the topic right now, but I do want to mention although I'm not retributivist at all, right? Completely against that. I am in favor of one of the valid functions of imprisonment is keeping criminals away from the rest of society, at least for a period. So I'm not really one who thinks that retribution works, and I'm not one who thinks that rehabilitation works much either. So one can, I knew you'd say that. So one can be in favor of longer sentences without approaching it from a retributive angle.
So Phil, I think I say this all the time as a teacher, that the same error is made in the education world as in the criminal justice world, which is thinking that the effects of just somebody getting older and their body and brain changing as a result of biology is the handiwork of either the teacher or the prison system. So I agree with you that rehabilitation doesn't often work very well in terms of like the specific policies that the prison decides to adopt. Similarly, like when a 10-year-old is able to do much more than a 7-year-old, it's mostly not the result of the amazing educational methods used by their teachers. It's mostly the fact that the 10-year-old brain can do a whole lot more than the 7-year-old brain could. And so the reason, part of the reason why we don't need super long prison sentences, as long as our prisons aren't like petri dishes for gangs and for violence to be learned and increased, as long as they're relatively peaceful places. Somebody who goes in at 18 and comes out at 28 is just biologically, developmentally not going to be prone to the same level of violence as they were when their brain was at a much earlier stage of development. And their hormones are more settled down and things like that. So that's part of the reason for letting people out. It's not that we have amazing rehabilitation methods, but just that, usually there's something going on with somebody's brain that if you just kind of take them away from things for a while, they're not going to be the same person they were.
Absolutely.
I'm going to make a quick note of one of the first things we can get into once we get everything ironed out is prison sentences. And so that'll be something that we can have as pretty early on in this project. But okay, so I think what I'm going to do is get from everybody in the group, instead of just saying should born males be in or not be in the prison, I think I will specifically ask based on the bottom surgery element or not, and then also ask if people think there should be a separate wing for it as well. And
I have a thought that I'd like to jump in on the last thing they said about rehabilitation, if you don't mind.
I would prefer to hold off on that just because it's just not part of anything that we're like voting on or part of the society yet. But if you just have like a really quick, like 1
Yeah,
minute or less
it's a
thing,
quick
go
one.
for it. Okay.
So the reason that rehabilitation works in prisons for adults and the data shows it out is because most people who commit crimes are committing crimes out of desperation. Most violent crimes, most theft, those things are tied to people not having opportunities to make it in the world, or they're raised in places where they don't have those opportunities. Like a lot of the places with the most violent crimes in America are places that don't have businesses and job opportunities. So people have to turn to other things to make money. So when you give them job skills and you teach them how to drive or how to do certain things, use work programs, teach them how to properly socialize with other people, teach them to care about themselves, generally that turns out really well. Rehabilitation works on people who are older or younger. As long as you can give them the skills to actually make it in the world without having to turn to crime, most people aren't going to choose crime. That's just generally seems to be the way it turns out.
Okay. All right, and then we can bring that back up when we talk about this later. I wanted to ask Travis a question really quick on the trans thing before we get out of this. So, Travis, imagine we decide for our society that our prisons will have 4 gendered sections. So we have cis male, cis female, trans man, trans woman. We have these categories exist. In your opinion, if these categories exist and that's where people go, if a trans woman has had bottom surgery, would you be in favor of letting her choose between being in the trans woman section or the regular woman section, or would you want her to specifically be in the trans woman section?
I guess I would give her the option.
Yeah. And then, okay, and then Phil, a quick question for you. Do you think it should be up to the person to choose if they are the potential victim themselves? So letting a trans woman that has a functioning penis be in a woman's section is putting the other people at risk. But what if it was the other way around, where it was and this is probably the rarest thing in the world, is that a trans man will commit a crime. But if a trans man commits a crime and the possible victim is them being a man that has a vagina going in a man's prison, if they say, I know the possibility, I can get raped, I don't care, that's where I want to be, should we allow them to choose because the person choosing is the only potential victim, or should we protect them with our knowledge of possible pregnancy or whatever and put them in that 4th wing that is a trans man wing?
This isn't something I feel particularly strongly about, but I would say you'd still want them in the 4th wing. If that's the way it's set up, you'd probably want to stick to the plan.
Okay, cool. And so I think that I'll set up something that people can vote on in 2 different sections. I kind of, now that it's such a close call, that it was the votes were 13-11 and 2 undecided on the trans prison thing. I want to find out how many people think that we should have 4 sections, and then also how many people are accepting of trans women that have had surgery being in the normal section. So there's a couple ideas there. Next thing I want to talk about, and anybody can leave at any time if they have any obligations. I'm going to keep this going till 2 p.m. PST, so another hour from now. One thing I wanted to talk about, and this one's a lot more complicated, but details on the assisted suicide topic. And the one thing I want to kind of find out, because I know a lot of people are in favor of assisted suicide, but there's so many caveats that should probably be factored in. 17 of the 27 voted yes on assisted suicide, and 3 are undecided. So only 7 no's. Is there anybody here that thinks there shouldn't even be a waiting period? If you're 18, you can basically go in the suicide booth.
With
No.
some stipulation, sure.
Okay, so let's start with you, Aric. Do you think how long of a waiting period is the smallest waiting period you think any adult should have for assisted suicide?
Any adult, that complicates it. So I
Like if
I
somebody
think that
applied in
generally,
our society, if
I see what
somebody
you're doing.
applied for assisted suicide, what is a situation that you think would need the smallest wait period?
Terminal illnesses, severe injuries, uh, life-altering events that lead somebody to be like unable to return. So like there's a story out of the UK about a guy who left a girl because she was abusing him. She convinced him to come home with her, and then she dumped acid on him. And it was so bad that the doctors wouldn't release the pictures, which is actually really rare. They kept him in a hospital in hospice for a month. He was so disfigured that his own father didn't recognize him, and his family had to break him out of that hospital to take him to another country. It's one that starts with a B that's in Europe to get him assisted suicide. He shouldn't have had that waiting period. There was no way he could come back from that. It was something like 90% of his body had chemical burns on it, down to the third
Oh
degree.
wow.
He should have been allowed to get that immediately because there's no bouncing back from that. He would just suffer until he died. That's why he was on hospice. Those kinds of things, you should not have any kind of waiting period. If you find out you have terminal cancer, you can't cure it. If you want to go out, you should be allowed to go out. So
Okay.
I don't know that there should be much of a waiting period for that. If it's something that
Would
can
you
be
say 24
altered,
hours? Would you say
24
that
hours
it's
is a good waiting period.
okay? Cool. So, in some cases, 24 hours, nothing under 24 hours. Okay. Would you say, and after this, I'll go up to Travis. Aric, would you say that there should be imagine this is happening in the US. Is there a certain number of people, well, don't worry about professions right now. Is there a certain number of people that would have to sign off on it?
Not in my preferential world. No,
Okay.
that should be a personal choice.
Got you. My concern with needing the people to sign off on it is because we're allowing something to be government allowed death, which is the government's probably top job is to protect us, to make sure that nobody is committing murders and calling them assisted suicide. So I think there needs to be maybe some set of like in the US, it would be something like you need at least
I think it could
two,
be
but
like a
probably
notary,
more. Yeah.
like a
Yeah.
witness.
I don't know if you need at least one psychiatrist, one medical doctor, one governor or mayor, or yes, something to make sure that that enough. I don't know. Anyways, I'll stop rambling. Travis, what are your thoughts? Maybe a quick version of a few ideas on assisted suicide.
Yeah, so when I voted on that policy, I just voted yes because I was under the assumption that such a policy would naturally come with some sort of regulations on it. Like I'm not aware of any place where you can just get an assisted suicide and there's literally no regulation at all. So yeah, I think
Okay.
there would have to be some form of regulation on it. Um, I think maybe one topic that could be of interest here, because it wasn't really clarified in the initial like wording, is what are we allowing assisted suicide for? Like, is this strictly for like physical health conditions, or would we also be including, like, for example, mental health in this
If
as
you
well?
if you were the emperor for the day or for the lifetime, what would you have it be? You personally, like, what would you allow? Would you allow everything, or would it be specific?
Well, I mean, I don't think you can allow like literally everything. Like someone just walks in and like there has to be some kind of limit. But I would think that there are certain mental health conditions that you should be able to qualify for assisted suicide for.
Okay. Okay. And then Jeremy, let's hop over to you. And I'm curious if somebody was turned 18, they came in and said they wanted assisted suicide. Let's say they don't even want to specify their reasons or any mental illness or any life-altering anything. They just do not want to live anymore. Let's say there's some hypothetical, and you can elaborate on this part if you want, where they're told that they have to go to a certain amount of psychiatrists, do a certain amount of things. 6 months later, this person still just does not want to live anymore, and but there's no specific reason, like Travis was talking about, like a reason. What would your thoughts be on that case?
I mean, the underlying ethics of suicide seem pretty straightforward. It might be difficult to figure out in some cases, especially if somebody might be lying, but the underlying ethics are that if there's a reasonable expectation that somebody's going to have a net negative life, such as a huge painful condition or degenerative disease, then it becomes a good thing. And if they're in the position of a lot of adolescents, young people who are experiencing some temporary emotional situation like a breakup or dropping out of school, where the reasonable expectation would be that their lives would get much better once they got over that, then suicide becomes a very bad thing. So in terms of the legality, then I think in the general defense of freedoms, the general argument in favor of freedom from a utilitarian or consequentialist perspective is that individuals usually know what makes them happy and what makes them suffer better than other people do. So usually by giving people freedom, you sort of more accurately reflect the happiness and suffering in the world, because who generally knows better about you than you. But in so many of these cases of suicide, I think what comes down to, like, politically, legally, if we're going to try to stop people from committing suicide, especially these young people in emotional situations, we're essentially saying we have reason to think that we have more knowledge about what your future happiness and suffering is going to be like than you do. You're mistaken about yourself right now. We have reasons to think that you will be a lot happier and have a lot less suffering than you are claiming to think you will have. So ultimately, the justification for restricting suicide is going to depend upon that. How good are our scientific reasons, our sociological reasons, and just our common sense reasons for thinking that a particular kind of person who thinks that their own future is clearly going to be negative, to tell them, no, we're pretty damn sure that you're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
We got all this evidence from all these people that were in a situation just like you, and now maybe they jumped off a bridge and then instantly regretted it, and now they're so glad that it didn't work. And so we have all this evidence to say, like, no kid, usually it's kids, you're wrong about your estimation of your future, and we're right. And so the situations where I would think about legally restricting suicide and maybe trying to involuntarily commit somebody for a short period of time are going to be ones that are based upon the amount of evidence we have that they're making a mistake about their own future prospects.
Gotcha. Okay. I'm going to come back to you with a question, but yeah, Phil. So you just had a long talk on this, so I'm aware that you're mostly against it. So can you tell me the cases where you are in favor of it?
Well, I think to be entirely, Jeremy laid out the nuance that I entirely agree with. Right, what we're really saying is we can't take back your death. We can't take back your suicide. Right, so it behooves us to have an abundance of caution to ever allow someone to decide to kill themselves in any kind of easy way, as opposed to committing them. I have, in my personal experience, when I think of suicide, I think of acquaintances who have killed themselves, or very close friends who have had family and friends who have killed themselves. And my experience with it has not been someone who has 90-degree burns, chemical burns throughout their body. It's not someone in hospice. I've seen people die slowly in hospice and think to myself, why are we making this person die over 2 weeks when it would be much more humane to just very peacefully allow assisted suicide in that case? But what I think of when I think of suicide are these people who are, deranged about how horrible life is. Like, they don't seem to have a particular reason to want to kill themselves, and yet they do. And that to me is a struggle that we have to stop. That we have to get people to just stop and smell the roses, go on a hike. I don't know what it takes. I'm not a medical expert. I'm not a psychiatrist, but highly emotional people who have their whole lives ahead of them should not be allowed to say, "Oh no, I'm totally convinced that life is terrible and I want to kill myself."
Yeah, man. I should say.
Can I ask you like a quick question?
Can I just hear what Jeremy was going to say though?
Oh, I just we're dealing with it. My nephew's friend, my nephew's 16. My nephew's friend killed himself just a couple of weeks ago in a small town high school of maybe about 300 students. So it's a huge impact for everybody. And he just took a bunch of pills because he had a fight with his girlfriend over the phone, and then talked to one of his friends who didn't take him all that seriously. And it's like a guy who is pretty popular and active and doing a bunch of stuff, and it generally seems like the kind of thing that was just an emotional wave coming over him that he'd never experienced before in his life, and not some kind of growing influence of chronic mental illness or anything like that, but just just some momentary thing that he didn't realize was momentary. And but then in that situation, what is the criminalization help? If he had failed in his attempt, what greater benefit would it do that the government had policy of like putting him in involuntary mental health confinement, as opposed to just his family and friends rallying around him? What would the criminal law accomplish? Probably not much, making it a crime. So I could see clearly it's morally wrong. It was morally wrong for him to do, it's morally wrong for people to think that would be something to encourage, because his life was almost certainly going to be so positive. If he had just gotten over that wave of emotion. But criminal law, putting somebody in jail because they attempted suicide and failed.
Well, yeah, in this case, we're talking about the assistant to them.
Yeah, so I guess that could be an interesting thing where if assistance is allowed,
somebody who's a little bit upset. And to lean back to the question, have you ever lived with depression, my man? Like just being real for a second. Because the way that you describe that as somebody who's like deranged about how bad the world is kind of strikes a pretty negative chord for me. It's like depression isn't, I feel sad sometimes. It's fucking suffering. It's being in a pit where you can't feel anything but anger or sadness all day, every fucking day. It's not as simple as like, somebody felt sad and they're deranged because they think their life is bad. People do it because they get pushed to a point where they can't hold on. I have attempted 3 times, and I finally got medicated, and I'm glad I did. I've lost many friends to it, but this rings very true, or not true. It rings very similarly to the conversations that I hear around this topic, where people go, "Oh, that person was selfish," and that always irritates the absolute shit out of me. So the reason I asked if you've had depression is because the way you talk about it sounds just so unempathetic that it just makes me so angry. So, do you?
So the word derangement is what triggered you? Because I could have easily just said depression. Maybe derangement is the wrong word.
Derangement and depression are not the same thing. It's the framing around the way you described it. It's not just the word. That word just sparked on top of it. It was a lot of things. It's just
I think
fundamental misunderstanding of
Eric,
what it's like to fucking live with that.
Eric, I'm going to cut you off real quick. I don't need to speak for Phil. Phil can speak for himself. But I think the difference between us lawmakers discussing how we want to form a law is way different than if like Phil was with somebody that had depression and was talking about their situation. So I Phil's a great guy. I don't think he meant to come off callous or anything. But anyways,
No,
Phil, go ahead and respond to that.
I'm
And
not
after,
implying that he did. It's just something that irritates me.
yeah, Phil, after you respond to that, I'm gonna ask Dillian a couple questions because he hopped in here. But Phil, go ahead and respond to Eric real quick.
No, I mean he can have his emotions about it, and those are 100% valid. So I don't have like any desire to argue or to say that the way he feels about how I sounded is that's fine.
Eric, this is really fast, but do you hold the view that mental illness just is a form of physical illness, full stop? That the social treatment of chronic mental illness should be the same as somebody who has a painful degenerative non-mental illness?
It depends on the illness itself. Like my uncle has schizophrenia. I've been dealing with clinical depression since I was 8 years old. There are some things that, like, depression can affect you physically because it can just take away your will to do anything. Like it's more complicated than the way a lot of people frame it. It's I don't see it quite that way. There are plenty of physical ailments that can't really be treated that would be more apt to be included with assisted suicide. But that's I just need to I'm not going to be able to answer your question right because I'm tired and that just for some reason that just sparked something for me. So that's the best I'm going to be able to give you for a second.
Well, that's a cool thing about having these conversations, and we'll have more detailed ones. Like these couple days of talks are big groups, so it's hard to get on one-on-ones. But for example, if we had a talk where it was you and Phil, or you and Jeremy, and then you guys each had studies for why you feel different ways, then there'll be good opportunity for us all to learn different aspects of each side, and which is hard to do when it's a big panel like this. But yeah, let's hop over to Dillian.
Actually, I wanted to ask one question about on this topic.
Yeah.
What about people who are clearly chronically suffering but don't have the mental capacity to consent to suicide or to decide that?
Interesting.
I just thought about it, but I don't have an answer to that.
Yeah, I wonder if Travis would bite the ethical consequentialist bullet like I would too, and say that the relevant issue is not consent. It's reasonable prediction about the person's happiness or suffering in the future, and they're the ones people who are of sound mind are able to understand their own condition better than anybody else usually. But somebody who can't consent, it falls upon anybody else with the power over their life to decide whether they're going to have a life of net happiness or a life of net suffering based upon the medical evidence.
Yeah, let's go to Travis on this one, and then
should this be an option is what I'm asking. What if you know that the life is absolutely going to be of net suffering?
Then we should kill that person.
Travis, let's hear your thoughts on that, and then let's jump to Phil on that.
Yeah, so I would agree with the kind of Peter Singer position where I think he takes the view that if you have like certain infants who are going to have a very painful condition. They're going to have a short life. He takes the view that parents should have the legal option to basically euthanize their child to take them out of their misery. I would agree with something like that. I don't really see what good is done by just leaving the child there to suffer until they like die in a few weeks.
Yeah, I want to throw in a thought real quick before Phil answers. I just hadn't really thought about this much. I think there's a huge difference between so I think the most important thing about a society is protection from being killed. I think the idea of neglect is such a complicated topic that when it comes to something like this, I don't think anybody is owed being kept alive. I don't think anybody's owed being saved. In a society, we can decide children being owed by their parents to be kept alive. You can't, even if you're not killing this baby, you can't set it on a table and not feed it. You're obligated to do these different things. But when it comes to adults and the existence of medical care, I don't think anything is necessarily owed to a person. So if there's somebody that's suffering, that if it wasn't for the humans keeping them alive, then something like euthanizing them is just the better version of leaving that adult on a table suffering. Where if somebody can survive on their own, I guess that just wouldn't fall into the category of a person that is unable to give consent. So there's my 2 cents on it. But Phil, what are your thoughts on Dillion's question?
Well, in my opinion, if someone is able to express an fear of death, even if they don't fully appreciate that that the rest of their life is going to be misery, all that's really required is that someone doesn't want to die, and then I'm not interested in killing them ever. Okay. As far as that goes.
Gotcha. Okay, so if they can express in any way that they do not want to die, then of course you don't take them out of their misery, even if all of us think that they're suffering and need out of their misery. But if they don't express it, then you're just kind of up in the air on it.
There's one more.
If it's someone who can't explicitly, doesn't have the capacity to explicitly say that, then their I guess aversion to death would be entirely instinctual.
I know that what we're talking about here would be sort of like the ethical ramifications of implied consent, and I would kind of be open to going either way on that. I'd imagine there's already been a lot of thought done on this subject, like the ethical ramifications of implied consent. So I would be willing to entertain, whatever seems to be the consensus on that issue, because I would really hesitate to kill someone who's not already, in addition to having a good reason to want to die, expressed the desire to die. But if they're not even conscious or not able to communicate and their whole life is suffering, maybe it is appropriate. I mean, that seems like there would be implied consent. I just, I'm speculating here though. I don't know.
Yeah, I'd also like to make the point that there's kind of a difference between like the principled position versus what we think would be best, practically speaking, to enact into law. Like I can think of certain hypothetical situations in which if someone is suffering to a certain degree, but they still want to live, there are certain hypothetical situations that I can think of where it might still be permissible or even good to kill them. But I mean, the question is, do we want to put something like that into law? Like, do we think a law like that would have good consequences?
Gotcha.
Maybe it depends on how we formulate it.
Exactly.
Okay.
I mean, this is another general point. I just gotta say really fast, but this whole time, anytime anybody's talking about banning something or legalizing something, especially banning something, I'm not even sure what that means unless you talk about what the level of punishment is going to be and how it's going to be enforced. How intrusive is the law enforcement going to be in society, and then what is the punishment going to be? I assume it's not going to be capital punishment for doing any of the things that we ban, right? Or life imprisonment. If we ban circumcision and then some Jewish family gets their baby son circumcised, is that life in prison for any of the family members who participated at all?
Well, yeah, I think we have to decide if something should
matters.
be somewhat outlawed, and then after that, then we go through, and it could be something as small as 1 day in prison or a fine or whatever, but we just have to decide, do we each individually think it should be said in the society, you can't do it? And then after that, we break it down.
I mean, to be honest, Jeremy, my opinion is that I'm against a life sentence or any sentence above 10 years, and I'm for a death sentence.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That is kind of logical for many things if we trusted our justice system.
Yeah, and I think that prison should be more of a rehabilitating place, I guess.
Yeah, man. Well, you're not American. You're not infected with our crazy retributiveness. No sentence is long enough.
Gotcha. Well,
that drunk driver killed somebody. How dare you only give him 25 years? That's the American
just
way
a
of
few
thinking,
weeks ago, something here in Bulgaria happened that I think it should have been a death sentence, but the guy I don't think he's in prison. He was just held for 72 hours and then released. He basically, I don't know what happened before that, but he cut up his girlfriend with an X-Acto knife, like her entire body, and it was horrible. And he was held in in police custody for 72 hours and released.
Do you guys have a bail system in Bulgaria? Because that sounds similar to bail.
I'm not sure, dude.
What country is it?
Bulgaria.
Yeah.
Okay, let's hop to one. I think we have time for one or two more topics. Just to see, I've made a bunch of notes for ways that we can word these topics differently, and I might have I'll email you guys to send ideas for proper wording for the propositions. But for now, let's just go over a couple more of these topics that we've. Well, actually, okay, yeah. Let's. I'm going to bring up a topic, and then I have to run and pee, and then I'll come back. And then I got another question. But let's go with. Let's talk about the topic of circumcision. Let's start with Travis, and then people can hop in wherever they want, and I'll be right back.
Yeah, so with circumcision, I voted lean yes on outlawing it in the case of an elective procedure for infants.
I voted to not allow it for kids, but allow people as they get older to choose it if they so wish, but not to do it to like an infant. Infant doesn't have agency. There's no real good reason to do it. And I don't consider religious reasoning a good enough reason to mutilate somebody.
I voted to keep it legal, even though I consider it highly immoral.
Why?
On the grounds that it's, well, one of the main points that I pointed out is a comparison with other things that religious people do with their religious freedom that I consider much more harmful, and particularly teaching small children about eternal hellfire for people who don't accept the correct religion, causing all kinds of profound psychological trauma. So if these things are going to be protected under religious freedom, because we don't want our country to be one in a constant state of religious civil war. Just because something is done to a physical body and another is done to a young child's mind, if we're going to allow religious freedom to encompass the things that it does, then circumcision seems to fall into that category. So we should try to oppose it the way we oppose people teaching kids about hell. You know, we should oppose it by persuasion and moral and rational and emotional arguments to get people to stop doing this stuff, because the alternative is, if you try to ban well-established religious practices, you're opening up your society to actual warfare, actual sectarian civil war.
I voted.
Yeah, I think that the circumcision would be kind of like the low hanging fruit. And I guess it's something a lot more people would agree upon and would be easier to implement. And where with, with the entire hell threatening thing, it's kind of in the basis of religion, and you are going to get religious, I guess, war, like riots, if you try to ban that.
Is there a difference between something being popular, therefore you're worried about banning it, and something being religious and worried about banning it? Because I feel like the religious idea itself, just maybe it can be a predictor that it will lead to like people having stronger convictions on it. But if a religion says that every Saturday you can kill a 5-year-old girl child, the religion itself, I don't think should affect if something should be legal or not. But maybe we feel differently about it if it is lower hanging fruit. Like if somebody wanted, their religion called for like a tribal face tattoo, and it was in the U.S., and somebody was going to get like a couple lines and dots on their child's face, would we outlaw that, but maybe allow a tribal back tattoo because it's not as devastating to their future upbringing in a certain area? I guess the U.S. part doesn't matter, but.
I mean, morally, I don't think that religious purposes should be considered, but again, practically, it's like it's kind of like it's going to be easier to, let's say, ban gas chambers rather than ban forced breeding of animals, right? Because when people hear gas chambers, they associate it with lots of other things. And banning the breeding of animals, that's basically stopping animal agriculture. And I think it's not exactly similar, because here we're trying to here circumcision is the low hanging fruit because it's not this essential to religion. It's just some random unnecessary mutilation that the child's gonna have for life. And I do agree that the psychological damage is much it's a lot worse, but it's not gonna happen if you try to ban it.
Gotcha. I changed my mind. This isn't a physical change like circumcision, but I changed my mind in the last few years on hijab laws. I used to think that it should be banned in schools like they were doing in France, because it's being culturally imposed in a sexist way upon the minor daughters from Muslim families. But then, the argument got through to me that, we ban going topless for our daughters and not our sons, for pretty similar reasons, because we don't want, we think it would instill like lust in the boys or something like that, or it would make our daughters look kind of culturally bad. And what's the great difference between us and our arbitrary standard of dress and the Muslims and their arbitrary standard of dress? And So
Yeah, that's a fair point.
I decided that they should, they should be allowed to have their culture for purposes of like societal stability and not causing a civil war. And then if you want to argue against Islam and you want to try to convince these girls to take off the hijab when they're old enough to make their own choice, then go for it. That's what I recommend. But I don't believe in the government bans.
All right, Phil, you're up.
Yeah,
Circumcision.
my position was to ban it, but provide for a religious exemption. And I think that my line of thinking is the same along that Jeremy's is. The difference is that by actually banning it with the religious exemption instead of simply not banning it, then we're able to normalize the idea that penises are not going to be circumcised, right? So people get, at least in this country, in the United States, it's normal that men have circumcised penises. That's what women expect. Parents don't want their kids to be laughed at in a shower. It's about normalization. So, that's what people say. Oh, everybody else is doing it, and so if we ban it with a religious exemption, we're opening the door to someday it not being normal anymore. And that's why I have that position. And then from there, we will be able to ban it all the way. Now, if we're the senators of a new society, I wouldn't even necessarily have the religious exemption at all. I'd say no. Yeah, you're not allowed to cut off your kid's toes either because it's your religion. Okay, so it's all banned. It's only that the religious exemption would be a practical circumstance in the United States.
So,
Gotcha.
do you guys know what percentage of men are circumcised in the United States?
I know with babies in the past like
imagine-
4 years, it's switched over to about 55% of newborn babies in the past 4 years, and now are not circumcised, and then 45% are. But before the past like 4 years, it was the other way around. But as far as people that live in the U.S., adults, last time I looked, it was something like 70% are circumcised. Maybe
Google says
closer.
80%, Dillian.
Oh, 80. Okay.
That's a lot. That's more than I thought it would be.
And the U.S. is
little
pretty
less than I
darn
thought.
alone, from my understanding, on this topic.
And if you're talking about like white, like further than first generation immigrant Americans, it's going to be way higher.
Yeah.
A lot of the men who aren't are like Hispanic recent immigrants.
Yeah, growing up, I mean, I didn't see everybody's dick, but growing up, I can say with reasonable confidence that basically everyone I knew and was in my friend group was circumcised.
Yeah, me too. In locker
When
rooms.
when I was on the wrestling team, like I remember there was one kid on our team that wasn't, and like half of the dudes there would pick on him for it, which is
man.
just it's always struck me as such a weird thing to pick on somebody for. Because like at the end of the day, you can always
you
turn
got
that
it
around
right
with
there?
high school kids.
Damn. I mean, I don't know if I know anybody that's circumcised that I've met in person.
Oh.
It's a big like cultural thing in America. Like even comedians talk about it in bits. Say like, "Oh, I just want my son's dick to look like mine, so he won't get made fun of when a girl tries to give him a blowjob." Like that's just like a big cultural thing here.
Let's see. Okay, so. Okay. Yeah, and when we go over that one, so the rest of these laws, I'm going to specify some stuff with the prisons and waiting periods for assisted suicide. I think with the circumcision one, there doesn't need to be any other detail aside from pointing out that this is referring to minors. I didn't initially point that out because obviously, I think obviously, when somebody turns 18, if they want part of their body cut or whatever, then that's fine to do.
Or pierced or tattooed.
Yeah.
Well, once you're 18, you can get a Jacob's ladder on your dick if you want to. I don't care.
I'm curious to hear other thoughts. I talked to Phil about this separately, but I might have a misunderstanding on the word elective. I was going to use the word elective in these laws when referring, because what I thought elective meant was that a medical doctor or a surgical doctor, I'm not sure exactly how those are different, but a doctor isn't saying this is necessary for your physical health. That an elective thing was somebody choosing, I want this done. Kind of like during the COVID lockdowns, elective surgeries weren't allowed because everything was so busy. I
don't-
thought,
Yeah, I don't think that's right. I think
okay, what is
my father
elective
gets a lot
referred
of
to?
elective surgery is surgery that you don't have to do immediately because it's like a medical crisis. It's not life threatening or like immediately threatening. Elective surgery
Okay.
is something that you can just schedule. You can like schedule in advance at any time that it's convenient for you to go in. So like my dad has like less mobility in his hand, and then he was going to get a surgery to like free up the muscle or whatever, or get like a collagen injection for pain. And he didn't need to do it right away, so he could schedule it like a month or two in advance. That's what elective surgery means.
Yeah,
In my own house, I have a pretty good example for that.
Gotcha. Because I was thinking, because I obviously there can be a case where like if there was something where something happened to somebody's penis when they were like 10 or something, and the on the books decision that any doctor would do would be to circumcise that that foreskin that had an issue, then that would be what they do, and obviously that should be allowed. But if we decide to make it illegal to have circumcisions, I just wanted to have a word for what we call it when it's personal decision by parents or kids or whatever to do, sort of like the top surgery, the bottom surgery. I was viewing this as one of them, where the choice, whether there's good reason for it and it's about mental health or not. I just wanted to have a word for what we're calling a person choosing it. So same with like with abortion, I use the word elective, but I guess maybe I shouldn't have that in there.
Yeah.
Where it's not because somebody's life's at risk, it's because they're choosing, I want this done.
Yeah, Carson, that's the reason why in your email when I answered those questions, I said undecided, and I said would need further clarification on what's meant by elective, because I
Okay.
got the sense that you might be using it in that way. So
Is there
because
a good
technically-
word to use for that?
I don't know what a word would be to refer to that, but like technically an elective procedure can still be like medically important. So that's kind of why I was asking for further clarification on what you meant there.
As an example to show the difference between non-elective and elective is my knee and my grandma's knee. When I crashed my scooter, I had to go into surgery. It wasn't something I could wait on because I had essentially exploded the top of my tibia with a spiral fracture. My grandmother just needs her knees replaced, but she can schedule them anytime. She doesn't have to do it now. If she went to a hospital, they wouldn't go, we need to take you into surgery. So for her, if I'm remembering the terms right, that would be elective. Mine was not. Mine was, we need to take you into surgery and put screws in your leg immediately.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, maybe I'll figure out some a good word to use just for brief little propositional laws. Like I know most laws will have like pages full of the detailed law, but I like the idea of when somebody's voting, they know that they aren't saying that it's illegal. Like if we're saying that when you turn 18, if you hate your arm and you want it surgically removed, in my mind, you can remove that. But if it's illegal to remove it till you're 18, that wouldn't include some kid that's 10 in a car wreck that the best medical choice is to remove it. So if you guys think of a word for me, email it to me.
There is this word cosmetic, right? But clearly like a religious Jew or Muslim is going to get pretty offended at the idea that a circumcision is cosmetic.
Yeah.
That it's the same as like a facelift to make yourself look more beautiful as you age.
That's essentially how I was.
That's
really
how
I was using elective, and I think maybe cosmetic can work, and maybe we can use a different one. And I think it's fine to use even in cases where it might be necessary. Like I think something like getting top surgery or bottom surgery, even for if you're in favor of it, you can still call it like this is a personal decision, not a doctor saying this is the best medical choice. Outside of conversation. I like there being a word for something saying that if a doctor were to see a situation without talking to somebody, they would have a medical choice, and maybe medical is not the word, a surgical choice, that this should be the surgery that should happen from what they can objectively see. And then separately, we can decide which surgeries we think are acceptable, like a 16-year-old having top surgery, but where a doctor wouldn't have just looked at the person and said, this is what's needed. Those things are based on somebody deciding for whatever reason, this is what I want to happen.
Is there a general principle here that anybody holds about social pressure to change the natural human body for the purpose of conformity?
Can you ask that one more time?
So social pressures in a culture that are telling people that in order to conform, in order to be normal, they should make some kind of alteration to what a religious person would call what God gave you, your natural body, just to be more like, just because everybody else in your society is doing that. Do any of you think there's something inherently wrong with that kind of social pressure?
Yeah.
I have the opinion. Are you familiar with Sam Harris's book, The Moral Landscape?
I haven't read it, but I've heard his speeches about it. Yeah.
The overall analogy that he uses throughout the book is that morality can be described as like a landscape. And I think that it's a particularly appropriate analogy on an issue like this, because what it essentially says is if body modification is a part of your culture, then that's going to be a suboptimal culture for the flourishing of human beings. So fighting against it directly could lead to like less advantageous outcomes that are even less conducive to human flourishing, but it would be a lower peak than would be ideal, right? So the more ideal peak would be to not require body modification, unless there's a more objective reason of why it would actually improve the human condition.
Yeah, a thought I kind of have on it is that you can do something to restore something, but here's an example I had when I was talking about if somebody should have, I think puberty blockers were the example. If somebody should use puberty blockers, and they were saying, well, if somebody that actually has precocious puberty, if they should be allowed to, because you're wanting to help them out, then shouldn't the person that wants to not go through puberty get to as well? And despite whatever the right answer on that is, the example I was giving would be that, you know how some people, if they have cancer, that a friend of theirs will like shave their head to match their baldness to show support. If somebody had a deformed, like if somebody got in a car wreck and their face got all mangled up, we wouldn't just say like, oh, that's what you got, deal with it. We would try to restore to what their face used to be. But if, let's imagine somebody's face is all mangled up and there's no fixing it, and they have a friend, and these are 10-year-olds. I think if their 10-year-old friend said, I want surgery done to make my face look mangled like my friends, to match, to make them feel better, similar to somebody shaving their head, I think that we can say that our doctors should do surgery to repair something back to what it was, like fixing somebody from a car wreck, but shouldn't allow a child to have a surgery done to change whatever is. So yes, restore, but not done to change just for the sake of them desiring it immensely. If that makes sense. How does any of that fit into what you were asking?
What about changes that you do in a positive way, such as working out?
I'm not sure if I follow.
You're changing your body. You can work out to, let's say, have more muscles than you naturally would if you didn't work out.
Mm-hmm.
Like in terms of Jeremy's formulation where, let's say you're in ancient Sparta and everybody makes fun of you if they don't see you outside exercising?
Mhm.
Yeah, that would be the analogy
Yeah.
from what I was suggesting. Social ostracization if you have a body that's basically a natural body that people typically have without extreme intervention.
So is the question, how do we feel if somebody feels like are we talking about what should be legally allowed because of social pressures, or what exactly are you wondering if our society should allow or not allow based on what
one
you're
of the
asking?
things that the law can do is to protect minorities from negative social consequences of this sort of social pressure.
Yeah.
Say a company was just thought that everybody was disgusting unless they had that Spartan, completely ripped, muscular body from working out all the time, and so you would just tend to not be hireable at any job if you hadn't modified your body in that way. That seems like a kind of thing where a government might protect the minority there.
I just got a text. I have to hop off here. You guys should keep talking as long as you want, and then whenever you leave, and I'll take care of it. But if you want to, after talking about this topic, you could get into like top surgery, bottom surgery, or whatever. But yeah, you guys have a good one, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Just talk as long as you want.
Like Carson.
Oh.
So what would the punishment be for circumcision? Sorry.
What I was saying is when Phil said, he said that any type of body augmentation is suboptimal for a better society, and I'm not saying this as a law or to have a punishment against not being jacked. I'm just saying, like, don't you think that there would be body augmentations that would have positive societal effects if they were implemented in this social pressure way?
So one of the things I think I made a caveat of like, if there was something that there's reasonably objective criteria for which we could say this actually improves human flourishing. So let's say working out and getting healthy because you're working out. And we have to make sure that part of that means not taking steroids that are going to lead to, cancers and other negative health outcomes. It's good to have that, or it can be good to have that as something that's normal. That doesn't, but I wasn't sort of making space for necessarily bullying a minority who doesn't participate in those body modifications. That was just an aside I had, that like there is space for societies that encourage on some level some form of body modification, as long as there's an objectively, and by that I mean criteria that can be shown to improve human well-being. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. What about, straightforward augmentations of capacities? Like we have hearing aid technology. I mean, it's not as if my normal quote unquote healthy hearing is like the best physically possible hearing that there is. Even though I wouldn't be diagnosed with any kind of hearing loss, I could potentially right now get implants that would make my hearing more powerful than it is right now, right? So is there a moral objection to a doctor doing something like that for me just because I want like super good, like 0.01% peak hearing?
I'm all for transhumanism. Whatever you want to do to make sure augmented.
Or maybe, there's been like a recent boom in AI. Maybe you have some kind of a brain implant that gives you memory or access to the internet at all times, and gives you some kind of superhuman ability to process information. And
as long as it's not Elon Musk hitting it, I'm all for it.
I think the immediate pitfall that we would all kind of see, and that we're probably all thinking about in the back of our heads right now, is that if you allow for those kind of body augmentations, then you do run the risk of someone who's starting off ahead with more resources actually then exaggerating their lead above everyone else, whether it's, improving their cognitive ability or their hearing ability, or, something as old as, LASIK eye surgery has now been around for a couple decades.
Yeah.
Mm.
I guess the solution to that, Phil, is, the natural things for somebody to say is, well, then that just underscores the importance of egalitarian ethics and politics,
Yeah.
and fighting that much harder to move away from the dog eat dog political philosophies.
Yeah. The solution is not to hold everybody back. It's to make sure that the lowest have the same advantages. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I
it's okay
believe
if it's
in
like dirt cheap, nearly cost free.
Mm-hmm.
I
LASIK, you
believe
said,
in
yeah.
genetic engineering. I believe in eugenics, and the solution to the common objections to eugenics, that it's gonna lead to irrational things like racism, or it's gonna lead to huge class divisions, is to just fight that much harder for egalitarian principles. If you don't want genetic engineering to lead to racism, then have affirmative action for the genetic engineer.
Well,
And
eugenics needs a rebranding. Eugenics needs a rebranding, because if a certain person hears you say that, they're going to think you just confessed that you're actually kind of like maybe racist, maybe a little fascist.
Right.
We need a new word for what you're describing, because I'm on the same page.
Oh, maybe we need a new word, but there are other words that have.
And that's exactly
been
what just
rescued.
happened. You described my reaction perfectly.
Yeah, but there are plenty of other words that have been reclaimed. There are plenty of other words that have been reclaimed. So I know your guys' reaction and then your reaction to your reaction, but it doesn't make any more sense to me to say that caring about the gene pool for the betterment of all of humanity is associated with evil, discriminatory, mass murderous philosophies. Then it would be for education. Nobody says like, oh, education, oh, be careful with that. The Nazis and the Maoists, like, and man, they believed in education. Don't you know that, like,
if you live in America, there's a pretty strong contingent of our voting population that says that about education.
I told my wife that when I selected her, that meant she was part of a breeding program.
I work at a gas station overnight in my real life, and the things like the stuff that you guys are like, nobody would do that. I hear that shit every single night because I work overnight because I like to talk to people. And sometimes, man, you ask the wrong person what's on their mind. There's a guy that comes in who has it looks like he has a facial tic. And one day I was talking to him and I said, "Oh, do you have Tourette's?" And he said, "No, I have demons." And I said, figuratively? And he goes, "No, literally, watch." And then he spent an hour trying to convince me that he had actual demons in him, and that's why his face tics. I meet all the weirdest people. So people who are education, better be careful with that. Those people come in and they usually have a lot of very political bumper stickers. So they'll come in and they'll "Oh, you believe that we should be teaching kids math?" It's a real thing that somebody's argued with me about. I live in Florida, so that really pings that, and I've lived all across the South, so I've been exposed to a disproportionate amount of those people, but there are a lot of them.
Yeah, who needs math?
Well, I gotta get doing. My wife's gonna be home soon, but it was a pleasure talking to all of you.
Yeah, it was.
All right, bye bye.
All right.
Have fun with your son, Phil. Yeah, it's this whole program here is pretty interesting, but I think I'm gonna have to keep going back to the point that I made over and over when Carson and I had a talk on at the difference between ethics and politics, which is that making something illegal, or banning something is not a magic wand that makes it disappear. So
The good
it does.
point to that would be like the drug war and the absolute failure that
Yeah.
it's been.
Uh-huh. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't make sense to me to even I don't even understand what it means to say I want to ban this thing, or we ban this thing, or we make this thing illegal, unless you get into
I
the
mean, we
weeds of
want more prisoners.
yeah, and we want more like corrupt, overzealous cops on the streets making mistakes, and
The FBI has been warning us about infiltration in the police force since the 80s. They just won't do anything about
it's pretty sick, man. It's pretty
it.
fucked up. And
It's-
then what is the
I want to
punishment
move
going to be? You
to
know,
Europe now.
like
But like in it's Oregon where they've recently legalized all drugs, right? Or at least like the majority of them. Because I know they did psilocybin like a year ago, but there's a guy in Oregon who has
Colorado
like a
was a
band
pioneer
name. Yeah, they
for
started this week.
psilocybin.
Yeah, psilocybin. That's
Yeah,
right.
Colorado was really early on the psilocybin.
Oregon. I was reading a story about this guy. I think he's a chemist. He has a van and he sells drugs out of it because they're decriminalized. But he tests them, and he'll test them right in front of you so that you know that they're not cut with anything.
Mm-hmm.
And that like reduces deaths, hospitalizations, handing out like clean needles for people, that kind of stuff is really good. Like I wish they would do that in Florida, because one of the stores in my district has a real problem of people coming in and using insulin needles to shoot up and then sticking them into the toilet paper rolls because they think that cleans it, and it just creates like a real biohazard kind of problem. There's a lot of reform that needs to happen, and living in Florida, there is no good reform happening.
Yeah, and we have the experience of alcohol prohibition with the organized crime, but also the fact that black market homemade amateur alcohol is extremely dangerous,
Mm-hmm.
and the
You know
possibility of
there's that old story of like the government used to poison alcohol during the prohibition to kill people. That's just a myth. Like I was taught that in school. I didn't know that wasn't true. It just turns out people don't know how to separate methanol from ethanol, and it was killing people.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So yeah, we've got all these examples of attempt to ban something backfiring in horrible ways, and then also being abused by politicians.
Oh yeah.
Some of the people that were fighting hardest against decriminalization of marijuana, the alcohol and tobacco lobbies, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but
They
I guess
Altria bought a huge stock of Juul right before they lost their flavors because they knew that cigarettes might be dying. Like companies always get involved in that kind of stuff, and so do the politicians. So like, damn, I had a point and I lost it. I have unmedicated ADHD, so that happens to me pretty constantly. That's why I've been like vaping this whole time, because nicotine helps me focus because it creates dopamine in my brain.
So I was gonna say though, man, it's kind of weird that Carson's framing things in terms of what things that are not banned today we would ban, and what things that are banned today we would legalize. I think that it's just as important, if not more so, to ask people, what should the range of sentences be for first-time armed robbery, or assault stemming from like a bar fight. Do people think, well, or drunk driving and killing somebody? Or I want to know whether people in this group think that agree with the sentiment that victim's never gonna hug their family again, so the criminal shouldn't have a right to either. We should basically put him away for life, and anything less than that is too short.
I know from experience. I bounced in 3 different states. I know from experience that every bar fight starts with alcohol, and most of the time they don't remember doing it. Like I love bouncing. If my knee wasn't like, if I didn't like destroy it on a scooter, I'd probably still be doing it today. But like watching bar fights and breaking them up, when people get that drunk, they're like children. They're like teenagers.
Yeah.
You can yell at drunk people loud enough, and they'll sit down. Like,
Mhm.
like one of the guys I used to work with was a little bigger than me. I'm 6 feet tall. I weigh 265 pounds. I'm a big boy. This dude was like 6'8", 350, somewhere around there. He could just walk into a room where there was about to be a fight, and he could just yell and tell people to sit down, and they would do it. Like, you should probably spend the night in a drunk tank. Maybe you should have to comp medical bills or something. But like, unless you're doing it a lot, I don't know that there should be like a hefty jail sentence tied to that.
I said to
Maybe
Carson in
investigate
our
what's
talk
going on at
on
home.
in that talk on ethics and politics with Carson, he was going like, we need to have it be illegal to ever punch somebody or to like touch somebody without their consent and all this. And he kept talking in terms of law. And I said at one point, like we should have the potential, I guess, to have the criminal law get involved. But I come from a small town, people get drunk and get in a fight. Yeah, people get drunk and get in a fight in my small town. Often what's going to happen is the deputy is just going to the bartender
like,
and
everybody go home.
the people
like,
around who
sleep
can
off.
hold their liquor like me are going to do what we can to break it up because we know them, we care about them and their families. And then the deputy's going to come, and then the deputy's main goal is not to arrest them at all, but to get them home to sleep it off. And the next day, like you said, they're not going to remember.
For us, the motto was
guys,
like, no
sorry,
cops,
I'm just
all
gonna-
cabs.
Sorry.
I'm gonna hop off because it's getting late and I'm gonna go sleep.
Sure.
All right,
Talking to
bye.
you.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks
Glad
for
you came.
having me.
Yeah, our motto was always like, no cops, all cabs. So the idea was, even if there's a fight, as long as nobody needs to go to the hospital, we don't need to call the cops. Like, we shouldn't. Cops only exacerbate the situation. A lot of times they make it a lot worse. So we would just like my go-to wasn't to like hurt somebody. It was just, hey man, let's go outside and have a smoke. And then I'd lock them outside and wait for them to stop banging on the door. And then I'd call them a cab and they could go home. Because at the end of the day, the guy will come back tomorrow and apologize, and then he'll get drunk and he'll probably do it again. Alcohol does that. But like, I love working security. I'm working on getting my security licensing now. But working in bars, just kind of like, the first place I worked was a gay nightclub in Ohio. And like, you never get to see what different drugs do to people faster than going to gay nightclubs, because those people love to party. And like, sometimes some of those drugs can make people very violent, and some of them just make them really weird. Like, I watched two dudes get in a fist fight and they were both on ecstasy. That was like borderline gross. But at the same time, I used to bounce at a strip club, and I would never do that again because it's a skeevy fucking business, and the regulars are so weird. Like, the one guy, he was an amputee. He had one of those things, the claws, He tried to hook one of our strippers. She kicked him in the face, and he just laid on the ground and like rubbed himself. And they wanted me to drag him out, and I was like, "You guys can do that. You get paid more than I do." Like, there's just looking at, if we were to like, I was going somewhere. Oh, right. When we had alcohol prohibition, how much worse were those fights? How many more people got stabbed or like taken out back and dealt with because they didn't want the cops involved? There's so many downsides to banning things and to outlawing them. Not to mention like the prison system. Like in Texas, there was I think he's a sheriff. He owns one of the prisons. He figured out that he could take home $750,000 of government money legally by cutting back the calories that he feeds the prisoners. And he used that money that year to buy a boat. While he's feeding these people like one orange, a slice of bread, and like Nutrilo every day. It's just like, our whole prison system needs to be changed. And that's one of the bigger things that I'm a fan of, is prison reform. It just seems to me that we should probably look at the data and realize that recidivism is a problem for a reason. There's other ways to fix it than just locking people in a cage and then kicking them out with a $20 card so they can get on the Greyhound.
Politically, we should support rollback of the police and courts in our lives, but just culturally, we should, like you're describing, that very healthy bar culture. We should find our own solutions and get them involved.
Drinking is one of the oldest human pastimes. You know?
Yeah, we should get the police and courts involved in human lives as rarely and as late in the process as possible.
I think that's why we've seen so much success with outreach programs that show up to mental health calls and things like that instead of cops. There's like there was a case I remember reading about. It was I think an 11 or 12-year-old autistic kid who was having an episode. His mom couldn't handle it, so she called 911 to try to get somebody to come help, and a cop showed up. Kid saw the cop and ran. Cop chased him and then shot him in the back a bunch of times because he was running. That cop got paid leave, and he still has his job today. I mean, we shouldn't be sending people with guns to places they don't need to be.
Yeah.
Outreach programs work. They cut down arrests. They increase safety in neighborhoods, and it's cheaper ultimately than sending cops everywhere.
And even when problems still persist, they're often worth tolerating. They're much better than the supposed cure of increased law enforcement. You know, that's how it felt like. It felt like Carson was like profoundly not understanding this point, and he kept saying like, what if you can't do anything about somebody who like insists on tapping you on the shoulder without your consent or whatever? And
it's irritating,
and then it's like, then you just fucking live with it, you know. That's what I was gonna say, you know.
Don't send the guy who's trigger happy to come and tell him to leave.
Yeah, then life isn't all sunshine and blowjobs, you know. If you have a itch that comes on you a couple times a day for a few minutes and it won't go away, you don't say, well, I can't get this fucking itch to go away, so amputation sounds like a good idea. No, amputation is not a tool that's
learn to deal
needed
with the itch.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, it doesn't happen as much anymore, but it actually happened a couple weeks ago. I used to wake up horrifying cramps in my calves. Like if you you see videos online of cramps, you can see the muscles moving. Mine look like if you have a sheet and you pick it up in a fan and it waves. That's how bad these are. If I when I was a kid, I wasn't like I should just cut my fucking leg off. I was like, all right, I'm gonna have to breathe real heavy for a little bit and wait for this to go away, and then I'll eat a banana and drink some water and I'll be fine. Like there's limits to things that you do and things that you should do. Like the way that you fix things isn't always the most extreme way that you can. I think part of the reason people are so resistant to changing those is just because of like propaganda films and stuff like that, where they paint them up as like the thin blue line between chaos and order or whatever. So, I don't know. Like most canines that die on the job are shot by the cops that work with them because cops aren't proficient with their firearms.
Even if they are just sending in agents of violence to try to impose temporary order. It's much more often a fomenter of increased levels of violence and disorder than it is like the ultimate source of order.
Show that out on a large scale with crime rates, right? The more police you have in an area, the higher the crime rates get. And some people will say like, oh, that's because they're catching more criminals. It's like, no, they exacerbate problems. They make things worse. They look for reasons to bother people, and that causes social distress. And then once you have that distress, it causes more people to get more violent. It causes people to be in more stress, and stress is the ultimate killer. There's a lot of reasons you don't need cops patrolling neighborhoods 24/7. It just makes people anxious all the time. Puts people on edge.
And there's also, one of the things besides veganism that I'm very involved in online and always interested in is urban renewal, improved urban design, walkable neighborhoods. These days, the catchphrase is 15-minute cities. Places where people can have
people look at that
stable
like
neighborhoods.
It's a bad thing.
Well, there's clearly a lot of industry opposition to it, right? Because
you mean I can walk to a pizza joint and a movie theater in 15 minutes anywhere I am in town? That's disgusting. It's like
the idea that like a third or more
afford to have a car. I love that.
Right. You can see why the auto industry would want to nip this in the bud, right?
Funny enough, the auto industry and suburbs are a big part of the reason why our cities are built the way they are.
Mhm.
Back in the day, you could just walk in the street. You could
Mhm.
go anywhere because people weren't driving. That's why jaywalking is the term for crossing the street where you're not supposed
Oh
to,
yeah,
because jay was like a slur back then. It was
yeah.
a heavily derogatory term. I've
Uh-huh.
heard that it stems from a word for the homeless. I've also heard that it has to do with various racial minorities. I haven't found a solid answer in what that is yet,
Oh, that's
but
interesting. I
it was
thought it
just
was.
to make you feel really bad
I thought
about walking across
jaywalking
the
was a
street.
pun on jayhawking or jayhawkers, but yeah,
Oh no,
you might be
Jay
right. Jay
was
was
the
a
thing you
general
would
slur.
call people. That was like fighting words.
Well, jayhawk is a slur too.
I haven't heard that one.
The nickname for Kansans is Jayhawk because in the years
You
preceding
know
the
what? I've
Civil
heard
War,
people say that because I lived in Ohio.
yeah, the pro-slavery Missourians called the anti-slavery Kansans Jayhawk, which meant like kind of a
No, I heard that in
marauder
Oklahoma.
or like some kind of like thief or it was a slur, and that's the state nickname now. But it was over the fights over slavery in the pre-Civil War days.
Like roads didn't used to have lines drawn on them. People would just try not to hit each other when they were driving.
But the thing about the history of jaywalking laws is like in the early days of cars, people were just driving too fast and recklessly and killing pedestrians, and their solution was to blame the pedestrians to get a not the point wasn't to put jaywalkers in jail. The point was to keep reckless drivers who ran over pedestrians out of jail, or keep them from having to pay for their hospital and funeral costs.
Don't make the drive better. Just don't go in the street, you idiot. Why are you
the
walking
victims? It's crazy, man.
That is a very you shouldn't have worn that dress kind of way to look at things. You shouldn't have been in the street, you fucking idiot. Like, but 15-minute cities are kind of appealing to me because if you think about it, that's how all of human civilization was for a really long time. Small communities of people who kind of all knew each other. They would be able to get anywhere they needed to in a short period of time. If I have to walk for 2.5 hours to get a quarter way across my city, it's too fucking big.
And talk about the basis for the real basis for decreasing crime. It's like,
it's property values a lot of times, isn't it?
Well,
like, isn't that why people usually argue like I don't want like low income housing is because my property value is down or whatever?
I mean decreasing like interpersonal crime in terms of you live in a community, you live in a walkable neighborhood, and and most of the people that you interact with, but if you don't know somebody you're interacting with, that like you know people that they know, so there's only 2 steps away from almost anybody, and so that there's going to be this social pushback to antisocial behavior. You're not,
and there's going to be a more concerted
atomized
effort to try to actually help those people when they need it to.
Right.
It's like every town had like if you were crazy in a small town, people would be like, hey, maybe we should figure out what to do to help him. Like, he's out there talking to himself. Maybe we should take him to a doctor and see what's going on. Now, back in those days, the answer was lobotomies, and that's not a great answer, but it's better than like just don't look them in the eyes and keep walking. Get that guy some help. Like, there's a guy that comes in my store at night, and I always feel so bad for him because he has untreated schizophrenia, but he's homeless, so there's nothing he can do. So he'll just stand outside of my store and like argue with himself. And people will come in and they'll look at him like he's some kind of monster. And I'm like, he's just a person. He's sick. He needs help. I can't afford to help him. He can't afford to help himself. Maybe we should put something in place to make it so we can. And in smaller communities, it's easier to get people around to do that. It's also better for socialization. It's better for kids. Like the whole nuclear family thing has been really bad for child socialization because it removes them from a lot of the social structures they used to have.
It would be even better than
raise a child is an old saying for a reason. It's how we used to raise kids.
It would be even better if instead of waiting for people to get these, extreme suffering symptoms of schizophrenia, and and then try different ways of treating it. If we all as a society financially supported the genetic screening to get rid of the most of the genes that are linked to schizophrenia, it's highly highly heritable.
It's not entirely genetic.
It's not
It's highly
entirely. It's not.
heritable, but
It's,
you can,
yeah,
you
it's
can
not
fill it up.
entirely who's going to end up getting it, but if you're not actually killing anybody, you're causing one embryo to be conceived versus another.
It's like I have a cousin who has cystic fibrosis, and the only way you can end up with that is if both your parents are carriers, and
Yeah.
they just don't know.
It's a moral
it would've been
outrage.
good for
It's a
them to
moral
get that.
outrage that we don't fucking get rid of cystic fibrosis because of
Well,
dumb
I
shit
think that we should, before
ideologies
you
that
I think
say that
before
we.
you have a kid, you should get tested for those kind of markers. It seems like a matter of personal responsibility at that point. I'm gonna have a child. Like, I don't want to have kids. I want to adopt them because I have ADHD and I got it from my dad, and he probably got it from his. And then there's the matter of like depression can be genetic. There's all these of like everyone in my family gets arthritis all over our bodies at like 13. It's not
Oh
horrifying.
my
It's not like
God.
rheumatoid arthritis. It's just like it's a little uncomfortable. But we all get it really early. This is all glasses, balding. This is all kinds of shit I don't want to hand down to a kid because I had to grow up with that, and it was hell. So like I'd like to adopt a kid who's like 10, 11, 12 because I know I grew up with a lot of kids who were in the foster system. And once you hit that age, they start like, especially if you're really shitty foster parents, which is most of them, you start getting told like nobody's ever going to want you. You're never going to be anything. You're just going to be a statistic. Go to school, don't come home. Just like it's awful. It's a terrible cycle to be in, and I'd like to be able to help one of those kids to have a better life and maybe be able to advocate in the future for other people to have better lives.
Yeah, if we're really going to be egalitarians, we have to get over these like beautiful abstract sounding concepts like freedom, pure individual freedom, self-determination, dignity,
All that individualist bullshit.
And we need to recognize that we're caused by the interaction of our genes and our environment, and then do what we
Are you
can
a fan of Evo Psych? Because it sounds very much like an Evo Psych kind of
yeah,
evolutionary psychology.
I think it's real science. I think all psychology should be based
all
on
psychology,
understanding of
evolutionary
theory.
psychology. I don't put a lot of stock in Evo Psych because the only way you could really prove things that Evo Psych puts forward is to like take a baby and then remove it from society completely, and then wait for it to grow up and then look at how it acts. And we couldn't do that.
I mean, I don't think it's true that you need to do clinical trials like that in order to understand that. Like, that's the only way to understand anything scientifically. I think statistical analyses of populations, like the kind of the kind of statistical analysis of populations that they do, controlling for as many variables as you reasonably could, I think produce a lot of valid and replicated results. It depends what the question is, like some questions like male versus female, like mate selection strategies. Those are highly replicated and very well grounded in evolutionary theory, and I think almost beyond
not really
dispute.
Evolutionary. Those are more social than anything else. It's like peacocking, right? Like in America, the way that you go about it is very different than you would in, say, like Armenia. That's another part of the reason I don't put a lot of stock in Evo Psych is like a lot of the things that we look at that people who are big fans of Evo Psych will point out as being like evolutionary or just things dictated by the culture. We're driven more by our society and our cultures than we are by our evolution at this point because we've essentially removed ourselves from the path of evolution. We've created society so we're not held to the pressures of nature except what we create, like global warming, but that's not exactly something we're going to evolve past.
I think the claim of Evo Psych isn't that we act just like our ancestors. It's that we have predispositions that are very similar to our ancestors, and then they interact with the kind of highly unnatural environment, the modern environment that's very unlike the environment of evolutionary adaptation, in different ways, because the evolved adaptations interact with that modern society. So to the extent that the modern society differs, then it causes different interactions. They don't deny that at all. But in fact,
It's
they,
just
you know,
that, like,
so for example, we have fairly reliable birth control methods, but and so
we have for quite some time.
but we have these evolved predispositions where more men still want to sleep with as many different women as they can.
Well, women are
That's
still like that too. It's like a cultural idea that women
not
women
nearly as
still-
many women are like that. That's
Well, I
the
mean,
evidence from
historically,
USI.
more women have reproduced than men. It's something like what?
Yeah, that's not
50,
what I'm talking
60%
about.
of women.
More women have
No, I know,
reproduced
but I'm
with
saying,
men because of polygyny, but but more the male reproductive strategy is evolved to impregnate as many women as possible. But the modern male, if he is sexually successful, he typically sleeps with a whole lot of women, but uses contraception and doesn't. So he doesn't produce a whole bunch of kids like Genghis Khan did, but
I mean,
he,
we don't
but
have a societal pressure to have as many kids as we want. As a matter of fact, we have social pressures against it.
right. So that's the interaction between the evolutionary adaptation for the male to spread his seed, and then the modern society and the technology of contraception that didn't exist for our ancestors. So
Well, our ancestors had contraception as well. That's a
not
large
not like we do.
like for example, right? Like
Not
there's
like
there's
we
a
do.
plant that no longer exists because the Greeks ate it out of extinction because it worked as a natural birth control.
Well,
The
yeah,
ancient
man, but
Egyptians had forms of birth control.
but
Like
the
we've
ancient
had
Greeks
birth
and
control for a long time.
the ancient Greeks and the ancient Egyptians, they seem long ago when you think in historical terms, but
So Cleopatra is closer to the iPhone than she is the building of the pyramids.
yeah,
And that kind of stuff.
it's like yesterday in evolutionary terms compared to the
Oh,
6
yeah,
million
no,
years from
1,000
when our
years is
ancestors split
nothing,
from
dude.
the chimpanzees. Yeah,
Well,
our
Homo sapiens have been
evolutionary
around for what,
psychology took place
180?
mostly took place long before the ancient Greeks and ancient Egyptians. So, like all these hunter gatherers that they didn't have the kind of contraception that Cleopatra did.
People find ways, like abortion is the oldest, like one of the oldest things that humans have ever done, at least society. We found evidence of that all the way back in the cradle of civilization. The ancient Egyptians did that too. That's like it's one of those things that's like probably just because of my bias. I think we should keep around to any extent that we can. Like there's no reason not to, and it's not exactly a new concept. But
yeah, I think
like there's been various different ways for people to like use contraceptives. We have a better understanding chemically of how pregnancy works now, so we have more effective birth control. But it's always been around. That's always been something that people want because having a kid is like a real imposition, and when you're a hunter gatherer, that's a real danger to have around. Have a kid that can't fend for themselves, and then it makes it so that you're basically unable to help out all that much for a very long time. It's I think that's why those things have been around for so long, because it's just always been like a kneecap on your life.
You know what, man? Speaking in terms of evopsych and abortion, there's some work by several people. I know Robert Kurzban and his co-authors on the correlates between the sort of personality and lifestyle correlates with people's political views on abortion, and what their studies purport to show is that the major predictor for people's political views on abortion is their own personal preferred reproductive strategy. So people who are more inclined to be monogamous, have fewer relationships and be more personally family oriented, correlates with anti-abortion, pro-life views. People who are more sort of personally career oriented and have multiple sexual partners before marriage, or who have very little interest in marriage, it correlates with pro-choice views. And it suggests
generally,
that
you could also see that those kinds of pre-existing views of like being more family oriented and whatnot could be very easily explained by like the family you grew up in and the areas you grew up in. If you come from Utah, you're more likely to be a Mormon. You're also more likely to be monogamous and more likely to be against it. If you grow up in a very conservative area, you're more likely to be conservative. If you grow up in the suburbs and you don't go to college, you're very likely to be
they're
more
using
conservative.
statistical controls for all of these things, for location, for income, education level. What they're doing is they're isolating
Higher income
sexual reproductive strategy. So they're isolating that as a factor statistically, and they're saying that basically relative to whatever other identifiable features of your background and your social position are, you take two people, all else being equal, if one of them is more monogamously inclined and the other is more promiscuously inclined, the more monogamously inclined one is likely to have more anti-abortion political views. And
well, the thing that makes you more likely to be monogamous is something that's also cultural.
Well, the other things that you would mention, religiosity and income level and education background. I mean, these are controlled studies. They're not, they're not just looking
at exactly how far you could possibly control for that when those are like severe correlative factors. I don't quite know how you could possibly control your way out of it. I've never read these like papers, so
I'm not sure what you know. I'm not sure if you understand what it means to like statistically control for other variables, but anyway, yeah, like
cultural significance is something that plays a big role in everything. That's why
that's why academics who know how to do statistical controls use statistical controls. That's the difference between doing this kind of study and just making stuff up.
That's where I'm coming from.
Well,
it's like I've heard counter arguments for and against, and I just tend to trend towards the against path. But that just might be because like I've seen a lot of how would I put it? A lot of morally questionable people on the side of Evo sites, so maybe I'm just naturally inclined against it. Just
so
because
Carson,
I'm like,
sorry, can I just fill him in here? So I brought up the idea that that people's views on abortion are there's some psychological evidence, like EvoPsych evidence, that is correlated with people's own sexual reproductive strategy, so that more promiscuous and like personal career advancement sort of oriented people tend to end up having more pro-choice views, and people who are more personally inclined to be monogamous and have interest in the family tend to have more pro-life views, which, the point of that, if that's true, then the arguments that people usually make about when does life begin, when does sentience begin, kind of stuff, it might just be like a rationalization. That's not actually where people's views on abortion are coming from. It might actually just be coming from like your own intuitions and your own desires about sexuality and relationships, and then you may, obviously it's more beneficial to somebody to have access to legalized and available abortion if they're going to be more promiscuous, have more partners, and also care more about their careers. And it's going to be less important to somebody who only ever sleeps with one person in their life and has a lot of interest in having kids. And so talking about when does sentience begin, when does personhood begin, that might not be the real issue. It might just be bullshit that people make up to justify whatever suits their like a personal sexual lifestyle.
Yeah, I think that
No,
might
the
be the
world
case for
isn't
some
black and
people.
white. It's shades of gray. It could just be that it's both.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
think it's
some mix
shades
of
for
both.
individuals, but depends on the individual. Like for me, because I think about this topic, it comes down to like what I think is best for a society, what's best for the citizens, and but for other people, they probably don't think to that level.
Do you guys feel like in your personal lives that matches up, like the people you know that are the most pro-life, most anti-abortion, that they're kind of like sexually monogamous, reserve, maybe
No,
sexually shy kind
not
of
in
people?
my experience.
I don't know.
Allegory doesn't mean trans, but yeah, not in my experience.
I don't really notice that much. The thing that seems to stick out the most to me, and this, yeah, hopefully this doesn't sound bad. It seems that because a large amount of people, maybe further left leaning, are bothered by the idea that women have had fewer options and held down more in the past, that it's there's this like need to try to fix things by saying like, let's make sure we're not holding them down. If men were the ones that had babies, but everything else was lined up the same, I think it would probably look a lot different. But it's this idea that like women weren't allowed to do this, or this, and so I know a lot of people that their focus is on. If you talk about abortion, the first thing they'll say is, for so much of human history, men have controlled women, instead of talking about the actual topic itself. So that's what I've kind of noticed.
Wendy said
that's
something to
part of
you
it.
that was Wendy. I don't know, Eric, if you heard Wendy's talk with Carson on abortion, but she said something to you that was really interesting, that I haven't heard very many people say. It seems obviously true to me too, which is that sexual coercion is not, but it's not binary. It's everything is not either wonderfully, perfectly consensual or clearly defined criminal rape, but there's a complete continuum between the two. So there are a whole lot of situations where there's a degree of on that coercion scale, there's a degree of pressure, social pressure. She talked about pressure from like a conservative society affecting women to the extent that
Religious, I think.
a whole lot of times that they end up having sex and getting pregnant, and it's not the level of rape that would hold up in criminal court to convict the guy, but the guy is still putting a lot of various kind of psychological and maybe implicit physical pressure on, and then there's all kind of pressure from the woman's society to where she isn't in control to the ideal extent. And that's a big part of the pro-choice position too, is you can't just say, that's what Wendy said to you, is you can't just easily say like, well, make exceptions for the cases of rape and then we'll talk about everything else, because there's not this nice clean distinction between rape and everything else. There's in the actual world of a sexual interaction, there's all this horrible fuzziness that leads to all kinds of harm.
Yeah. I don't know if you can use elements of the fuzziness for law, but in some way or another, I think sometimes it needs to be factored in. But I would say that if somebody feels pressured because let's say somebody grew up in a very strict religion, like a Mennonite or something, and then by the time they become an adult, they don't really have any experience outside of this pressure. And then they're pressured into, having a baby or whatever. And then like a month into being pregnant, they decide to like leave this life. Maybe their husband dies or their husband was abusive or something. And they leave this Mennonite life and they experience the world and they go like, oh, wow. Like I feel like I was kind of forced to get pregnant and I didn't even know any of this world existed. I don't know if there's ever cases, or at least many cases, where I would think that something that's like a verbal pressure or like a social pressure should change what the law should be in a situation like that. But I guess I haven't like thoroughly challenged myself on examples of it. So,
Yeah,
Coercion is a pretty effective tool of abusers. It's a thing that gets a lot of people, and then when you try to take it to court, you're like, well, he coerced me, he talked me into it. A lot of courts won't hold that up just because, like, it depends on the state you're in. If you're in Ohio and you do that, the judge probably isn't going to care. But if you do it in, like, California, certain parts of Kansas, then they will. Coercion is a topic that only seemingly somewhat recently has been put into the cultural zeitgeist about like something we should actually give a shit about.
Yeah, and the fact that it's not either or, is either there or not there, is a big part of why abusive people get away with it.
Well, part of the problem
is the fact that they can adjust it on the sliding scale, and if somebody's noticing that they're an abuser, then they just like dial it down a little bit for a little while, and they're still doing it, but at like a lower level, below people's radar, and then they'll bring it back up again later.
Yeah. Well, the problem with pressure is it's referring to this idea of intent. You can't unintentionally pressure somebody to do something, and so if there's intent, it's really hard to. I like that face you made because you're probably right. I feel like first of all, it's hard to even prove a situation took place at all. But let's say it's caught on film, and you can even see the person say, "No, come on, let's do this." Knowing to what level it's like, I know this person doesn't want this thing to happen, but I'm going to try to get them to with my words and my charm, versus this person saying they don't want to, but I don't know if they're just playing with me. Like breaking down the idea of the intentions behind the talker. Is the talker bad for society? Should there be this like this punishment because they did this wrong thing, or do we even know if they had any ill intention? It's complicated to break down somebody trying to verbally convince somebody to do an action.
That's exactly why I tend to err on the side of not getting police and courts involved on both sides. So I don't want there to be an escalation in the number of guys that are getting convicted of rape, all the way down to like moderate levels of verbal pressure. That seems like an insane over policing in society that should be handled by social pressure instead, and education instead. But on the other side, I want to say that those kind of cases of that verbal pressure, and there are cases where women have a more justifiable claim to, not have had their interests respected, and to have it be important that they have access to abortion. So I'm not, when I'm giving these as examples, and I think Wendy was holding the same point. I don't think she was arguing that we should have a lot more people arrested for rape, but she was saying that this explains this kind of social pressure, verbal pressure. It explains the justification for a lot of abortions in a pretty good way, and it's a big part of why I end up being politically pro-choice.
Gotcha. One quick thing before we all get going, not that we need to get going right away, but I was popping in on my phone to see if you guys were still talking, and I heard something about that was also brought up earlier about if somebody is drunk driving and they hit somebody, that the idea is that because the family of the person that died can't see their family, that it's like an eye for an eye, make it so the family of the person that did it can't see them. I think this is a complicated topic. I think I'm very currently, until I get convinced otherwise, very far on the other end as you guys. I would even take it more to a Minority Report level and say that I don't know what the numbers are for if you get caught drinking and driving and not hitting somebody, but I guarantee I think the number should be way higher. I think we'd live in a better world if you get caught driving while above 0.08, that you go to jail for like a full year or maybe 6 months, something like that. It's a bummer because I know the downside of you lose your job. It's going to mess with your entire life. But then
you end up more likely to be drinking when you get out.
Yeah, which is a bummer. But
because you got nothing else to do with your time.
Yeah, but the attempted murder, which it essentially is, I just like, if I had made a list of the things I care the most about, DUIs having a stronger impact, like having a stronger punishment outcome than they have, is probably one of the top things on my mind. Maybe top 12.
You seriously think that exactly 8.08% BAC is a level of recklessness
Well, I think
that exceeds everything else, like people commuting to work when they're tired, or driving while arguing with their kids in the back seat.
It is more dangerous to drive tired than it is to drive drunk in a lot of instances.
Yeah, first of all, I don't think that we should look at a situation like I guess an argument from hypocrisy that if you can't fix this problem, then don't fix anything in the same category. The question is,
but you called it attempted murder.
Yeah.
And not somebody who's falling down drunk.
Well, that's
trying
the thing.
Trying to drive home, but somebody. So this is for probably somebody of my body size. I mean, I don't know because I drink a lot, but it's probably like 2 beers within an hour, and
it's
for Aric it might be 3 beers.
Let me see. If I had to learn the chart when I did my certification a ways back.
But
it's,
let me just clarify real quick, though.
It's like 1 beer per 100 pounds, I think, somewhere around there.
Something like that. So for an average woman, it might be 1 drink, and that's attempted murder. That's
1 glass of wine.
Well, what did she do afterwards?
1 beer per 100 pounds.
Well, she had 1 drink and then she drove, and then nothing happens to somebody who gets 3 hours of sleep a night and commutes to their job every morning like that.
Yeah, the question is it provable or whatever? Yeah, I think I think it's very complicated. I think we have to look at a lot of different details that goes in. I don't know if it should necessarily be looked at as attempted murder that you are caught with the 0.08. We might have to look at every car wreck that has happened from a drunk driver. What level were those drunk drivers at? And like, what's a likelihood that, because there's a difference between a number that's decided to be illegal and a number that is likely to make a situation happen based on our averages. And so if it's like a 2 point something is the likelihood to get in a wreck and kill somebody, where a 0.8 up to a 2 point is just likely to cause something minor or less likely to cause a wreck, then yes, I think
the vehicle also matters for that, because if you drink 1 beer and get on a motorcycle, you'll probably fucking die because you'll drop that bike.
Yeah,
if you're
I
driving
don't care.
A car and you drink 1 beer, you can be fine.
Fair enough. If somebody wants to get on a motorcycle and drunk, I think it should be illegal. But I wouldn't view it the same, because they're more likely to harm themselves than somebody else. But they're also likely to harm somebody else if they're drunk driving on the freeway and there's cars zooming by and there's hundreds of cars and a motorcycle gets in a wreck and then it causes a 60 car pile up and a bunch of babies die. I'm just saying, like, I think we have very good reason to make it to where you can't drink and drive. And then if somebody's willing to drink and drive, especially to the levels that we can see, like, what is it? Like, I think
before you go to prison, you should probably do rehabilitation, like send them to rehab to try to clear up a drinking problem, and then put them on probation. Prison should be a last resort. The more you put people in prison, the worse crime rates will get.
I'm not talking about prison in the U.S. and how good or bad we are at rehabilitation. I'm talking about just the idea of an outcome and how, like in an ideal society, like we're creating our own. I'm just pointing out that I feel like if people were aware, like, I mean, it's so often it's just like you see it in every movie because of how often we see it with our friends, that somebody's getting ready to go drive and then you have to tell your friend, oh, you're too drunk to drive. And then half the time we let them anyways, and the other half we don't. But it's just like not that a drunk person that's going to drive is going to think while they're drunk, I better not because I know this outcome. But we would just have such a different look as a society at it if we knew that you just didn't get like a DUI. It's almost like a joke if you get a DUI, but you got a thing that shows that you were willing to risk killing random children.
But, Carson, there's all kind of social factors that play into people's attitudes that aren't just about the objective risk of driving in that circumstance. You know, do you seriously think that the average like 30-year-old man, after having 2 beers within an hour is going to be a worse driver than the average 90-year-old.
I don't know.
Like that seems completely ridiculous, and yet people let their 90-year-old grandparents drive because they insist and they want to.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
if you've ridden with really elderly people driving, it's just plain as day that their capacities are causing a lot more risk than somebody whose BAC is probably right at 0.08%.
Yeah, I think laws around driving are ones that make sense to be due to circumstance. I don't think there's any set thing. We base it off outcomes. If everybody could text and drive and not get in wrecks, there shouldn't be a law against texting and driving. So if people are known for like 90 on up to cause wrecks and to cause harms and deaths and whatnot, then we should have what we currently have, which is when you hit a certain age, you have to go in and be evaluated, test, make sure that you're capable.
But is it attempted murder? If some 90-year-old family is telling them, you know what, you're scary to ride with, grandpa, and he goes, I've been driving for 70 years, and then he gets in his car, and then you ride with him or whatever, and he's like going over the line several times, and he's driving at unsafe speeds, and not like looking or using his signal before he changes lanes.
It's somewhere on the scale of attempted murder, yeah.
Okay.
Well, murder implies intent. Like it would probably be more along the lines of manslaughter.
Yeah, you can call it that. The detail doesn't necessarily matter to me. It's more about the intention. If you know the possible outcome, you know that you aren't good at what you're doing, and then you are willing to take that risk. In this case, it would be classified as manslaughter.
Not good at something you do is kind of harsh. Like when you poll people to ask if they're good drivers, over 90% of people say they're good drivers.
Yeah, above average drivers. Yeah.
Well, they all say they're above average drivers, and they're not. We have more traffic fatalities than anywhere else in the world. Isn't that our number 2 cause of death after like heart disease?
Yeah, almost everybody in my family, almost everybody I ride with, they drive with either like one hand at 12, doing like a gangster lean, or they drive with like one hand at 6. They're like barely touching the wheel most of the time. They like got their drink over here, and they're like driving at the bottom of the wheel because it's more relaxing. The number of people that you actually see with hands at like 10 and 2, or now they say like 9 and 3 is the best, who like keep their hands on the wheel, have full control over the car. Other than the professionals like bus drivers, the number of like...
I think a big part of the problem is that we don't really require proficiency to get a license. Like there's a guy that comes to my stores from Russia. He came here, told a guy he didn't have a license at the DMV, and he wanted to get one. He goes, do you know how to drive? He said no. So the guy at the DMV took him outside for half an hour and walked him through how to drive, and then went, all right, we're going to take your test. And he got his fucking license. Like there's a kid who has his license that works at the Wendy's next to me. All he had to do was drive in a straight line at a good speed for 2 minutes and like park. And he got his license from that, and then just had to do the written.
If you guys had to guess,
we don't require it.
How many people in the U.S. do you think died in 2021 from drunk driving accidents? I know it's going to be impossible to do a random guess.
I think traffic fatalities is in the 50,000. So in 1 year,
it's somewhere in the 10s. So like 6.
So from drunk driving, maybe 10% of the total traffic fatalities. So 5,000.
13,000. And they even have it broken down to approximately 37 people die every day in the U.S. from drunk driving.
But Carson, I think another thing that's going to happen is, the police have this legal threshold, and what they're going to say is anytime that there is an accident that has a police report, fatality or non-fatality, and somebody involved has 0.08 or higher, they're going to say this was caused by drunk driving. Mm-hmm. Even if the person who ran the red light was not the one who had been drinking, even if
that happens quite often, actually, that like even somebody gets T-boned because they ran a light. if the person who T-boned them was drinking, they'll just call it a drunk driving thing, even though they had the right to go.
Yeah. Do
Yeah.
you think if
There was
the person that's not drunk
my
runs?
old neighbor, his brother was driving out. He was pulling out from a light, and a guy on a motorcycle had like a stripper on the back of his bike and hit the bed of his truck at like 60 miles an hour. And they tried to say that it was my neighbor's brother's fault when he went on a green light because he had a fentanyl patch because he was prescribed them, and that made it so that like he's the reason why that lady died, and he had to go to court to defend that. He had to hire a lawyer, even though that guy ran a red light while he was drunk with a stripper on his bike. Sometimes they just look for things that sound good in court because there's like a financial incentive to try to put more people behind bars for the police unions.
Yeah, exactly. I knew a guy who got a DUI because he hit a deer that jumped right out in front of his truck. You know,
That's weird.
yeah, just like there's nothing about the incident that suggests that he did anything else except have a chance to slow down just a tiny bit before he hit it.
Yeah.
And he wasn't wasted. He like had a couple of beers after work in the supermarket.
I'd be curious to see like a breakdown of what happens, like the average impairment of somebody that's 0.08 that like led to that number. Like there had to be a back and forth about 0.07, 0.09, the right experts breaking it down.
You can find diagrams for that. I've seen them in health classes before, where they show like stopping times, reaction time differences between different levels of intoxication, stuff like that. They, I know they have them in the Texas Health Course books. I don't remember the name of the book. I know it was printed by Scholastic, but they all are, so that doesn't really narrow it.
I should look that up.
But,
I don't want to sound too critical because
about that. A lot of times they look at stopping distances. So the more drunk you are, the longer your stopping distance is, regardless of like the baldness of your tires or whatever. It extends it because your reaction time is slow.
Yeah.
But well, we can find diagrams for that.
So I know I sound like I'm very critical of what I think is maybe the over policing of this this very low limit. But you know, I acknowledge that 50 years ago, all over the country, people were getting completely trashed. Like people were regularly getting hammered and then just driving home completely out of control, and the sheriff would stop them and like escort them home, and they wouldn't face any punishment from it. And people were dying, but that's not 0.08. Like for almost anybody I know.
Yeah, like I'm open to the science to find out what each thing means and what each amount of drunk level leads to this kind of wreck and that kind of wreck. Like I wouldn't even have, I don't even know what a 0.08 even means. If somebody said it was 0.8, like these are just numbers that are out in the world. I don't even drink alcohol.
That's what I think. That's what the main point I want to make to you, Carson, is that if you're just having a conversation with somebody, typical person who is right at 0.08, and you were describing them, like describing their condition, you would not describe them as drunk typically.
Oh, really?
Like,
okay.
So I mean, I'm just, from me and lots of people I know, when people colloquially say drunk, if you just saw that guy and you looked at him and you said, "Wow, like Joe is drunk right now," he would blow way higher than 0.08%. And so what I wanted to say is that like the mad Mothers Against Drunk Driving and the political pressure to make this a serious law enforcement issue is one of the most successful campaigns in our country's history. It was great. It was amazing that we went from police not caring about this and accepting it as just normal reality to nowadays where it's serious and people just culturally stop their friends from getting in the car drunk.
Isn't a big part of the reason that changed the fact that everybody has like reliably clean drinking water, because people used to just keep like whiskey in a bowl and by their door.
They had nothing else to drink.
You would just walk in and they would be like, "Have a drink," and you would just take a ladle full of it and drink it, and you would just do that at everybody's house you went to. That's such a strange concept to me, but like that's why pirates always used to drink rum, because water can't be kept on ships. So people would just use alcohol instead. It's really weak alcohol, at least compared to modern standards. You can buy Everclear on the shelf, and that's as stable as alcohol can be outside of a lab. So we have really strengthened things.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of cultural differences there too. But yeah, I just think that as good as this movement was, once you have these institutions that have an interest, especially like police getting making a profit off of arresting more people and charging them with more serious crimes, there's a perverse incentive. There's a highly perverse incentive in the low standard for intoxicated driving. And part of the reason why the punishments are what they are without prison is that they involve large fines, and then they involve even more fees for for counseling and stuff that the government is profiting from. So they have this huge incentive to bust a lot of people on first time DUIs, and I don't like it because a
lot of the really high mandatory minimums that we have come directly from lobbying from police unions.
Yeah.
They have a direct hand in dictating those kinds of things, because the more arrests they make, the more they can claim that there's too much crime, and they can get more funding. So
well, at least us senators are not corrupt police officers, so so we can decide
also,
for our society like what will be best, not So yeah.
One other thing is that the difference between somewhat non-optimal driving from a safety perspective and nearly optimal driving is smaller than the difference between optimal driving and not driving. Like, driving is just inherently dangerous. So
so especially when you're driving on the road with so many people who barely know how to drive their
right, yeah. So just like having a more anti-car lifestyle, urban design that requires cars less, and just moving away from public transit with professional drivers, moving away from just individual control over motor vehicles is really important from a public health perspective, above and beyond trying to make people be slightly safer drivers in various specific ways, having our society be less dependent upon driving. And also the vehicles that more and more Americans are driving these days, these huge SUVs and trucks, right? They kill pedestrians at a much higher rate.
They swipe cops a lot too when they're doing traffic stops.
Okay, I think I got to hop off here.
Yeah,
but yeah, I'm glad everybody was here to talk. I think we got a lot figured out. I'm not sure how well I think 6-panel talks go, because it's hard to have one-on-one. Like, I always feel awkward because I want 2 people to go back and forth, but then somebody else hadn't talked in a while. Maybe we'll do more like 4 panels when they're more planned out. But yeah, I'm gonna send out a new thing to vote on. I'm gonna have people choose between majority versus a 60-40 for vote. And then I'm going to have everybody just say what age they think adults should be, and we'll just do an average of what everybody says. And then I'm going to send out a couple updates on options for like the trans prison thing to see if we can get a more agreed upon outcome for that.
Carson, I wonder if we could get votes on just, you could decide what the categories are going to be for the choices, but just roughly what people think the punishment should be for the things that they think should be criminalized.
Yeah,
I think we would have to nail down the specifics of like what we're looking at and get basics down before we start looking at the punishments, because that would be all very like general and comparative to other things.
It would just be nice to know, whether somebody thinks that abortion being criminalized means that we should just try to disincentivize it with a fine or some county jail time, or they think that abortion is equivalent to the first-degree murder of a 2-year-old child and should be punished by decades in prison or something like that. I think that would separate.
I
people a lot.
personally, I try to edge away from fines because like fines basically means like illegal for poor people. Like for example, if you see a sign that says like no parking, $100 fine, that just means that's a $100 premium parking spot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For rich people.
Yeah.
I
For
agree.
now, let's
But,
imagine fines
Sweden
don't
doesn't buy that.
exist. Yeah, let's imagine fines don't exist, and it's just a prison sentence of sorts. But yeah, I think we should do that with each of the topics. Now, these ones are all interesting because these aren't like typical crimes like murder, stabbing, all these different things. These are just like, I mean, half of them aren't even crimes. It's just like not letting the government allow a certain thing, like who goes into the prisons and the death penalty. But if and then we legalize the marijuana and all that, assisted suicide's more of a government-based type thing. So really, aside from the animal topics, the only ones that I can imagine would be abortion and circumcision. So it could be, what would the legal punishment be if anybody went to like a black market type situation and had a circumcision on their baby, or had a fetus that was older than 12 weeks aborted, because 12 weeks is our current agreed upon in this society.
Well, it's going to matter for age of majority too, especially in the case of statutory rape. You know, do you think that like if you're going to say the age of majority is 18, do you think that like a 25-year-old having sex with a 17-year-old is something that we should discourage and maybe give him a couple months in jail, county jail? Or do you think it's like some people think exactly the equivalent of violently raping someone? You know, if you think that's going to be a really different opinion, so like the extent of punishment is gonna matter a lot.
Yeah. I'll type something up and maybe I'll send it your way, and you could let me know if you have any thoughts on like the wording of it or anything before I send it out to everybody. But yeah. I better hop off here. But so tomorrow, I got a handful of talks tomorrow, but tomorrow from 11 a.m. to PST to 1 p.m. I'll be doing another one of these, but with there'll be other people as well. So if you guys want to hop in, you're more than welcome to. Once it gets to 6, I'll probably stop it at that point. But there's a couple. Jerem's going to be here, and then this guy Matthew, really good guy, will be here. And so anyways, we can go over another handful of different topics, so that'd be cool. All right,
that would be cool.
Yeah.
You guys take care. I'll talk to you later.
I'll see you around. Yeah.
All right, bye.
Peace.